You call them out in the middle of the trial. You guys call yourselves fair and report the news, but you're not reporting this case. Everyone else is.
And so he went through all their testing and training, and then he worked for the CIA for many years. In order to get punitive damages on step one, we needed to prove that they primary intent to harm. The jury finding itself removed the cap from phase two.
We are back with another DansDeals podcast. We're trying something a little bit different today. We are here in the law offices of Norman Friedland, here with attorney Velvel Freedman.
Nice to meet you.
He just won a recent defamation case against CNN and was awarded punitive damages. I think that was the first punitive damages awarded by a jury against a mainstream media since like New York Times v. Sullivan. Is that right?
Yeah, we've been trying to figure that out, but I think that's right. Yeah.
I asked ChatGPT this morning and it said it was right.
Well, then
so
let's go with that. Yeah.
I'm feeling pretty good about
Definitely
it.
in a very long time. Yeah.
Yeah. Incredible. I saw like National Enquirer and Gawker against Hulk Hogan, but those aren't mainstream media. Those are tabloids.
Yeah, and also Gawker wasn't a defamation case. It was a invasion of privacy case, so slightly different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, different standards.
Okay, very cool. So I'm JJ from DansDeals.
I'm Dan.
And I'm Vel.
So Velvel, Devin. How do you figure out which name to actually use?
I like making it complicated. Yeah,
I've seen it reported 3 different ways now.
Yeah, I asked the Wall Street Journal to flip it to Velvel, or Vel, and they said we use legal names.
Okay.
I said, well, I think you should use the name I want to be called by, but they were unpersuaded.
I'm surprised they wouldn't just call you by the name that you requested.
Yeah, I was like, you called Joe Biden, Joseph Biden every time you refer to it. Like,
right.
Yeah, no, they didn't seem persuaded. Look, my parents are Bali Shuva, so when I was born, they called me Devin. I went by Devin until I was like 6 or 7. Then we became religious, and I thought Velvel was the coolest name ever, so I refused to answer anything other than Velvel. So then I was Velvel for a long time. And then when I started in the law, no one could pronounce Velvel, so the folks at my firm just shortened it to Vel because they could handle that easier, and it just kind of stuck. So I've got all 3 now. Yeah.
Okay.
I answered all of them now.
But do you prefer the media call you Velvel?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I've signed my pleadings as Velvel. I signed my website's up as Velvel.
Okay.
My legal name is Devin still, and my bar license is under Devin. So you'll see in some of my filings, it'll say like Devin Vel Freedman in quotations.
Okay.
But yeah, no, everyone calls me Velvel or Vel.
I mean, I can relate. I'm like Daniel, Dan. I don't even know what my name is at this point.
The best is your boarding passes where it says Daniela.
Correct.
Middle initial is A.
Word to the wise is parents should not give their kids a middle name their boys a middle name that starts with the letter A, or else you will have Gabriella or Daniela or something. And they're like, oh, is this your wife's boarding pass? Where's your boarding pass? I'm like, no, that's me. It's Daniel A. So
that makes sense, actually. I never thought about that.
So I kind of want to just jump right into the CNN case and hear some background because a lot of people have been talking about it. I think it's been covered by every single media outlet. CNN actually covered it.
Yeah, they did.
In the end, you called them out. Yeah. You called them out in the middle of the trial. You guys call yourselves fair and report the news, but you're not reporting this case. Everyone else is.
Everyone else had these huge articles. I mean, like 20-minute read articles.
Yeah.
And you go to CNN and it's like, is there 100 words on this? Like even afterwards, there was nothing.
Shortest.
Totally bury it.
Shortest CNN article in this.
I've never seen anything like it.
Hey, give them credit though. They reported it. So.
They did report it. So huge story, huge news. Congrats on the win.
Thank you.
Really incredible. Full disclosure, it's my brother-in-law, married his sister. I actually saw a post recently. You were on the DansDeals forums 2011. Posting about an LSAT course.
First of all, how did you even remember that? That's before you even started working at DansDeals.
Before I started working at DansDeals, before I ever met him or married into the family.
Right, years before.
Yeah, that was
so I was surprised you even remember that he signed up for an account.
One and only post.
It was at one post?
Yeah.
I was trying to, we had no money back then at all. So we were trying to make some money. So I was teaching the LSAT. I was tutoring the LSAT. And I thought it was probably a good place to try to...
Were you married at the time?
Yeah, I got married in 2009 and started law school a few months later. So we had, my wife was working as a preschool teacher, making, I think it was like $1,000 a month as she'd get up at like 5 a.m, take the subway. Yeah, pregnant. It was terrible. In retrospect, we should have just taken more loans, but she did that. And I was trying to teach the LSAT. So it must have, that must have been the genesis of that post.
Right. And what was it called back then? Want?
This is a funny story. Yeah, wantmy180.com. That's right. Yeah, I was looking for jobs, and I wanted to somehow tell folks that I had gotten a perfect score in the LSAT.
So you were in law school at the time when this?
Yeah,
okay.
I had, as soon as I'd taken the test, so I got a perfect score on the LSAT, and as soon as I did that, I started trying to tutor to make extra money, and I was able to get decent rates at that time because it's a rare score. Then once I was in law school and I was looking for jobs, I was looking for a way to signal to potential employers that I was pretty smart beyond
so for your resume.
For my resume. But like it's considered like taboo to kind of talk about your LSAT score. So I was sitting there with my wife and I was like, I can't figure out a way to do this. Like, I think I just can't do it. It's just too much of a faux pas. Yeah. And she goes, well, why don't you just call the business something like wantmy180.com or something? I was like, that's brilliant, right? So both from like an advertising perspective and from like the purpose I wanted it for. So I did. I put it on my resume. Well, I created the website wantmy180.com and like had it built.
Let's employers know that you got the 180 without actually saying that you got a 180.
Exactly, right?
It's brilliant. It's a great strategy.
She was really smart. Yeah. So it worked. Yeah. So that's where I think I created a Gmail account and that's how that started.
Right. I think I considered hiring you.
Did you really?
To tutor me. At one point, I was looking into it. I ended up going with LSAT by Fish.
I guess I didn't do a good enough job.
I think it was more expensive.
He was or I was?
You were.
Oh, really?
I think.
Well, because Fish is offering Want My 175 and he was offering Want My 180.
I should have hired Dan for the marketing.
That's so funny. Yeah, well, I guess Fish is doing a class of 30 kids at a time. So you can't really compete on price with that.
That's true.
Like you were doing one-on-one.
I was doing one-on-one. I don't remember what it was. It might have been like 150 or $200 an hour or something like that. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, he did a full course. I think it was $2,000. And if you're doing 150 an hour, it's obviously going to
be a lot more higher. Yeah.
In retrospect, worked out. Got into an Ivy League law school, dropped out, work with this guy now. So.
And now you got to put Ivy League dropout on your resume, which always looks good.
That's true. He was also a backdoor part of the trial team. We had him coming in and consulting and helping us on a bunch of stuff.
I heard about that. I mean, that's awesome.
It was pretty cool. He's responsible for some pretty significant parts of the trial. I'm sure we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I guess let's just recap really quick. So you said you put that on your CV, right? Yep. You got a 180, and where did that lead you?
Ended up applying to all the top law schools. I thought I was guaranteed to get in because I had a perfect LSAT score and a 4.0 from Yeshiva, but found out pretty quickly that at that point in time, the Law School Admission Council that aggregated all the data created these reports that basically ranked me against all prior applicants from my school, which were 0 other applicants. So all their reports just said like insufficient data, insufficient data, insufficient data. Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, which were at the time the top 3, I think they still are, had never accepted a candidate like me before. Went to like full yeshiva for all the years beforehand and had, a bachelor's in Hebrew letters.
Is that from Miami or who?
Yes, from Miami, yeah. Okay. So I got rejected from Yale. I got waitlisted at Harvard and Stanford. I got accepted into Columbia. Got accepted into Northwestern with a full scholarship. Used that to get some money out of Columbia. Nice. Then I ended up reaching out to Alan Dershowitz to see if I can get into Harvard. Right. And he was really great and talked to me for a little bit, asked me for some materials he could use. At the time, I knew nothing. So I gave him absolute useless material. And he kind of lost contact with me, and I went to Columbia. Side note, I spoke to Professor Dershowitz, maybe it was a year ago or so. And he told me that after that year, he felt kind of guilty that we had lost contact, and he helped a new student get in, and Harvard has changed their policy and now accept students. So I told him I'm taking responsibility.
That's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that cool?
Because Harvard does take yeshiva kids now.
They do, yeah.
That's right.
So evidently it was Professor Dershowitz who did it, and he did it because he felt guilty he didn't help me.
Interesting.
So, yeah. Wow. So for all the people that went to Harvard Law, you got me to thank.
That's amazing. So after Columbia,
I went to Boyschler and Flexner, which is a very well-known litigation boutique. David Boies is a very famous litigator. I was there for about 7 years, and we started our own firm in 2019. Been here ever since.
And how many lawyers are at your firm now?
Ooh, something like 25.
Wow. So you just started how many years ago?
2019, so 5 years ago or so.
5 years
ago. Yeah, it was August of 2019. Yeah.
Working for you now. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's been, Baruch Hashem, we've had a lot of success.
Wow. Okay.
No complaints.
So brief recap of the previous couple cases, the big.
Sure.
I mean, it's like
I mean, I think you told
High
me.
level.
I think you told me that the CNN case came from one of the previous cases, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it's always going to be like a snowball effect. I can't even imagine like what's coming now
We've
from
gotten a
people
lot
that
of
were watching.
inbounds. Yeah, we've gotten a lot of inbounds. Thank God. Yeah, that case, we had a Bitcoin litigation, cryptocurrency case that went to trial at the end of 2021, and we ended up having a month-long federal jury trial. We got $100 million from the jury.
Wow.
Then after prejudgment interest, it became 140.
Wow.
Yeah, and so that had a lot of press and a lot of attention. And Zach, the client in the CNN case, saw that verdict come out, and he was like, "I want those guys."
That's amazing.
Yeah, and he reached out to us. I mean, a bunch of other lawyers too, and eventually he chose us.
Smart man.
I like to think so. It worked out for him. So.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin case, I remember that he claimed he founded Bitcoin, right?
He did.
And then that was proven to be untrue, I guess.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Satoshi Nakamoto. Yeah, when we picked up the case in mid 2017, he was I think a legitimate contender for Satoshi.
Okay.
It was
Craig
Wright. Yeah. Okay. I say legitimate cautiously because there were a lot of people that said there's no way based on some of the things that he did and some of the tests that he failed.
Mm-hmm.
But there was a significant contingent of people who thought, well, there might be something here. And that was in part because the guy who took over after Satoshi, Gavin Andreessen, kind of vouched for him and said, oh, this is Satoshi.
Oh, interesting.
And so when we picked up the case, we actually thought, like, who knows, like this might really be real. And so we litigated it that way. But as time went on, Craig became more and more apparent that he was just constantly saying things that were untrue, even under oath, and forging documents nonstop. To the point where the courts, really hammered him on it and, said nothing is more inimical to the administration of justice. You're forging documents, you're lying under oath. And
wow.
So, his claim to the mantle sort of kind of went up in smoke. At that point. Yeah.
And that was kind of through the depositions and the trial.
Yeah, and the experts we retained, like we had forensic experts that would come in and review the documents to kind of, because you look at a document, it looks okay, but then when you open up the metadata inside the document, you can see that it's been manipulated, when it's been manipulated, or he used things that we call like PGP, which is pretty good privacy. It's like an encryption key, and he didn't realize that the PGP encryption key includes in a stamp of the document a date and time, but not in like human readable format. You need to convert it from computer language to human readable.
Right.
But people that know this,
know how to do it.
Yeah. And so we'd convert the PGPs and it would be like, allegedly signed by Dave Kleiman years after he died. Right. And I was like, okay. Like,
so is this even like in a Word, like if I save a Word doc and email it to someone, they could dive into the Word doc, or this is like more of an online like resource protocol document?
So, it's a good question on Word docs. Certainly PDFs include those edits, in history. And like we'd see, we'd open up the PDF and we'd look at the metadata and you'd literally see a tag where it says like PDF text edit. And it would be like the open bracket. It kind of looks like almost like the HTML of like websites a little bit. And so you could tell it had been modified once you open the metadata on it. I remember we had I cross-examined him at a sanctions hearing because we moved for sanctions based on all these, lies and fraud and everything. And we had a hearing and I wanted to talk to him about the metadata. And we were really nervous about like the judge saying, well, how are you asking this layman about the metadata? But he claimed to have been a forensic document expert. So before I asked him anything about the metadata, I was like, you're a forensic document expert, aren't you? And he's like, yeah, of course. I mean, he was very, very full of himself. And he says, yeah. And so then I went right into the metadata, and sure enough, the other side objects. And the judge was like, he seems to be filing no problem. Like he's an expert,
Right.
It's like, all right. And then he ended up getting so mad at me during that cross, he threw a piece of paper at me.
No way.
Yeah. It was a little anticlimactical because when you throw paper, it kind of just like hit the floor.
He didn't make an airplane out of it.
Yeah, no, he didn't. Or ball it up even and like chuck it. But the judge turned around and he goes, Dr. Wright, you throw another thing in my courtroom, you'll be in handcuffs so fast your head will spin.
Oh, wow.
And that got him kind of rattled. So
what's up with you and judges getting heated? Because in the CNN case.
When a lawyer makes misrepresentations to a court, it's a pretty big deal. I think, the lawyers are supposed to be officers of the court, and everything they say to the court needs to be, you have to have complete candor to the tribunal, and it's our ethical obligations. And many lawyers take that very, very seriously. And if the court feels, putting aside what happened in the CNN case, but if the court feels that a lawyer has lied to them or has misrepresented things to them, that can blow up real fast. And I think that's what we saw in the CNN case. I think Judge Henry felt CNN's lawyers had lied to him. We believed it too, based on what we had said. You know, they had some technical defenses to it, so I'll leave them to defend their own conduct. But the judge obviously felt that they had lied to him, and that's what happened. You know, you get a really angry judge if that happens.
Right. So, okay, background.
Yeah.
Zach, give me the 3-minute rundown of the history of the case.
So Zach reached out to us about the case. He told us there were a bunch of other, First Amendment and defamation lawyers that were looking at the case, and so we looked at it too.
What's the time frame? Like, when did he first reach out?
Ooh, this would have been February. This was February of 2022.
So half a year after the pullout.
Yeah,
like that.
About that, right? Exactly. And actually, the only reason I remember that is because at trial, CNN tried claiming that Zach was in touch with us in December, and then there was documents that were lost. And they tried implying that it was, we had advised him to destroy documents. Of course, is outrageous. And so I ended up using a privilege log to show when the date of our communication was first used, which was in February. So it was post-date of that time frame. So yeah, he reached out in February, and we do our own due diligence in the cases. So we reviewed the video segments, reviewed the digital article.
Tell us what was his claim? What did you feel looking at it the first time?
Yeah, so I little careful about attorney-client privilege stuff here. So I got to be a little high level, but he basically said, here's this video segment. It says things about me that are just not true. It accuses me of operating on a black market, being a criminal.
And that was still live on CNN.com, I guess, at that time.
Yeah, you could go online and watch it. You could go on their Facebook page and watch it. The archive still had it, so you could see it all over the place. And so we were able to watch the video segment. We were able to read the digital article that it was about, then talk to him. And he's like, I didn't do anything illegal. I never did anything criminal.
I think a lot of people watching have no idea what Zach did leading up to this segment.
Right. So, it came out at trial. Zach's kind of restricted from being able to talk about it, but a lot of this is now public. So what came out of trial was Zach started off as a Navy SEAL, and he was in SEAL training for about 3 years. He got injured at the end of SEAL training trying to do this really dangerous maneuver with like a boat filled with sand, like docking it on rocks in water or something. And like the whole team needs to like lift it, and something happened and it fell on him, and it resulted in some serious spinal injuries. He tried to rehabilitate that, but he couldn't finish the SEAL training at the time. So I think he served in the Navy for a little over 3 years. And then they discharged him honorably with all kinds of medals and stuff. We went through that at trial, and he was very good there. Went back to school, finished his education, and then enrolled in Blackwater, which is a private government contractor, protected the CIA and other government officials that were traveling through Afghanistan and Pakistan for them. And then while there, the CIA kind of picked up on him and noticed what he was doing and recruited him to come work for them. And then
they poached him from Blackwater, basically.
Exactly. And so he went through all their testing and training, and then he worked for the CIA for many years. He equivocated on exactly when those years were. He's not supposed to disclose exactly when he was and was not in the government service.
Does the CIA pay better than Blackwater?
It's actually interesting. He's a real patriot, right? And so he would go overseas and train like the SSD, like the Saudi Arabian, well, they're called the GIP, but he would the United Arab Emirates Special Forces and stuff like that, and their CIA. And we asked him, like, well, how are you comfortable doing that? He's like, these are U.S. allies. Like, they need to be westernized. If we don't do it, that vacuum will be filled by China or Russia or something else. Like, talked about how Saudi Arabia is the foil to Iran at all times. Like, they're a huge ally to the United States because of the Sunni Shiite Muslim fights. They're just enemies. And so that's very useful to the United States.
So working for the CIA could have even been a calling, I guess, for someone who wanted to be a SEAL. I mean, I don't like.
I can tell you a funny story when the Mossad did the beeper, the walkie-talkie and beeper operation.
Amazing.
Right?
Historic, yeah.
Zach called me and he was flipping out. He was flipping. He's like, you do not understand what this takes. He's like, this is unbelievable. He's like, only the Israelis could pull this off. It was like, then of course I got into the debate, like, who's better, the CIA or the Mossad? And he's like, well, he won't give you a straight answer on that. But he's like,
resource-wise, the CIA has to outspend them like 1,000,000 to 1.
I'm sure that's true. That's true. I was talking more just like tactics.
Right.
I mean, Kelso, can you imagine the CIA ever authorizing an operation like that? I mean, the gall to pull that off is unbelievable.
It was crazy, but it was so cool to see somebody who has that kind of experience like really nerd out about it and be like, you have no idea, that was unbelievable. Like, what an operation. Like,
it was like an airline price mistake for us.
Yes, exactly. You know, he was real impressed with it. So that was cool. So when he left the government service, he began kind of changing what he did into a service for other governments. So it was like a revolutionary deal where he would take these large corporations, these huge defense contractors, he'd go work for them and then train other sovereigns, special forces, their spies and things like that. And so he began just kind of going corporate in terms of servicing large corporations for their needs, whether it was the Saudi Arabian government to create their CIA, or whether it was to extract people from Afghanistan on behalf of large corporations. He was kind of servicing large corporations in the security and intelligence sector.
Right.
So you have
Sweet business to be in.
It was awesome. It was awesome. Like the things he did were insane.
Yeah.
We got into some of it at trial where he was literally teaching spycraft at the trial. Like how to, he's like surveillance detection. He's like, you really don't want to like bend down and tie your shoe and look in the mirror. And I'm like, why not? Right.
Right.
You'll get made immediately. And then he's like, it might've been 2 people trailing you. And now it's going to be 40 people trailing you with a beacon on your car and air support. And it's like, what happens when that happens? He's like, then you're done. Like,
right.
Because we're talking about China. You're talking about, Russia. You're in hostile areas. If you get made, you're done. Right. And so it was really neat to listen. Obviously, he was very careful about the details he could expose about it, but he talked about brush passes and dead drops. And it was, for me as a guy, I was just like, tell me more, like what else? It's so cool.
Right.
It was so cool.
That's amazing. Okay. So the backdrop is he was getting people out of Afghanistan for corporations.
Right.
And CNN ran this story.
Correct. Yeah. And the story portrayed him as a black market criminal. Mm-hmm. That's what we argued. It used the word black market over and over, put banners or labels of black market underneath his face by his name. We argued black market has one dictionary definition, which is illegal market, trading and illegal activity. And then the other thing we argued was that, as a whole, the entire reporting gave what we called a defamatory gist, meaning like kind of like the gist of the segment, all of it together, gave this impression of Zach being a bad actor preying on desperate Afghans, which of course was not true because he never took any money from any Afghans.
Right. They had like a technicality, right, that they won pre-trial that because he posted on the internet means he was targeting Afghans like on the internet. He was advertising to them. And it's a little bit like legal, like come on. Like, yeah, sure, I post on the internet. It doesn't mean I'm targeting everyone.
No, that's true.
Right?
That's exactly right. They did. They won summary judgment that he had advertised to Afghans. But what was a little unfair about that, I thought, was the court's reasoning in its summary judgment order was very clear. He basically said, you posted something online, so by virtue of doing that, you've advertised to the world. And he used this example. He's like, if I'm watching TV and the judge has a full head of hair, right? He goes, and they're advertising hair transplant surgery or something like that. It's like, I may not be the target audience because I don't need hair transplant surgery, but at the same time, you have advertised to me. And so that's totally fair. Like, I agree with the judge's conclusion. But then when it came to trial, it was like the finding that was told to the jury was he advertised to Afghans. And then when we tried putting a little context on there, CNN was objecting. Right. And the court kind of made us do a dance. But we eventually got it in. Okay. And I think it was effective that they understood what was happening, which was, I posted publicly, but I had a clear target audience, right? The chief security officers, the CEOs, the COOs on LinkedIn, those are the people I was really going after.
Right. And if someone would individually contact him, he was not interested, right?
Right. And we saw that over and over again in trial, which is like an Afghan would reach out. His first question was, do you have a sponsor able to fund? Right. And then when they would say no, or they wouldn't answer, he would discontinue contact.
Yeah. Right.
So.
Okay. So that brings us basically up to the trial. Right.
Yep. Well, we got some really good pretrial wins too, I think, which was,
tell me.
So, a lot of lawyers like to use summary judgment, which is this device we use in litigation, which is have the court resolve things, and they try to win the whole case with it. And I've kind of taken a different approach to it in a lot of my cases where I'm not trying to cut your head off with summary judgment. I'm not trying to win because that's very difficult.
Mhm.
But I will try to inflict like some mortal wounds on you, right? Like chop off your arms. You have to come into battle with only one arm. And so one of the things we
It's
did.
a great metaphor.
Yeah, and no, that's really what happened. And so what we did is we moved for summary judgment on like discretely issues, factual issues. And the first issue we did was Mr. Young did nothing illegal. Zach did nothing illegal or criminal. And we argued under summary judgment standard. They have no evidence he did. He says he did not, which is evidence he did not. Now the burden shifts to CNN to put some evidence. And we had them under oath and deposition saying, we have no evidence that he did anything illegal. We never had evidence he did anything illegal. Then they said, we never reported that, which of course was the question for the jury to determine. Right. But, so we went to the judge and we said, hey, there's evidence that he did nothing illegal, his own sworn statements. There's no evidence he did anything illegal. So CNN has failed its legal burden, find as a matter of law that Zach did nothing illegal or criminal. And so he granted summary judgment on that. So that was a big deal, right? Because
so you're like surgically deciding what to put forward for summary judgment.
That's right. Yes, exactly. And then we did it again. And we said, find that he's never taken any money from an Afghan. And we did the same thing. Zach said he's never taken any money from an Afghan. You have 7 years of his bank records. There's no transfers from any Afghans. You've got his income tax statements that show all of his income.
That they all got all that in Discovery?
They got all of it in Discovery. It's all accounted for, right? So we're like, there's no evidence that he ever took money from any Afghan. Find he didn't. And, they came back again trying to argue garbage, and there was not there. And so the court granted it again. So they walked into trial with the jury being told, you accuse this man of operating in a black market, which we argued sole dictionary definition was black market, was illegal market. They got told, I have already decided that Mr. Young did nothing illegal or criminal. I have already decided he never took money from an Afghan.
Why did they say black markets have gray market? Well,
I have no idea.
Everyone knows there's a gray market, there's a black market. Like, there's obviously a difference between the two. They can't argue that a black market is the same thing as a gray market.
They were, who knows? But the case, in order to get punitive damages against the media defendant, you've got to show that they did it with a primary intent to harm him.
Right.
So, one could argue that black market sounds a lot worse than a gray market. And if you look at their pitches, all of these emails came out, the progression of the story.
Those were unbelievable. I mean, it really seemed like they just wanted to get him, and we got to figure out how we're going to get him. And you see their legal team, and they're like, oh, I don't know if we should run this. Wow.
Yeah. So, I don't know why they did, but that would be my speculation. That's why they used it. Yeah.
Do you think that just because Dan mentioned their internal communications, and I remember, to me, the one that stood out the most was one of the reporters saying, I'm going to nail that Zachary Young mother effer.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that to me was the whole case with intent to harm. It was such a crazy thing to hear from a reporter, regardless of the context, just a crazy quote to hear from someone reporting on someone else. Do you think that?
And just to add context to that, sometimes you read an article and you're like, wow, they really have it out for this guy. But you don't have proof of that. You think that as you're reading it or you're watching it.
Right.
And wow, I'm looking at there's so much evidence that they really were out to get him. There wasn't just.
So what I'm wondering is it going to change that they're no longer going to say it, but they're going to still do it? Or is there going to be is it a real reckoning? Because I'm sure their egos are bruised. All the reporters involved in this story, I mean, they were arguing very hard that they did nothing wrong, and in a court of law, they were proven wrong.
Right. I mean, there was a point in the closing statement, CNN's closing arguments, where their lead counselor, David Axelrod, tried arguing that if the jury found for the plaintiff, then all the reporters in the story would bear a scarlet letter, essentially, which got an objection from me that was sustained because that's not a relevant consideration for the jury. It is what it is. But certainly CNN seems to recognize that this finding has hurt the credibility of the reporters involved.
And the network, I'm sure.
And the network, yeah.
Who was the expert? She's a professor. She teaches ethics and journalism.
Emma Lacey Bordeaux.
Do you think they're going to change at that level of standards and practices within CNN because of this case?
I don't know. The standards and practices document we put into evidence, we didn't show portions of it. You've got to, there's all kinds of great stuff, and you have to just make decisions of what you're going to show the jury. And so stuff falls on the cutting room floor as you're trying to fit everything into an hour and 45-minute presentation.
Right.
But there are portions of that document that go into detail about defamation cases and how banners are really difficult in defamation cases. Like, you got to be careful about banners, and
Oh, wow.
and talking about, tough language like that in documents can be used against you in defamation cases. So they're aware of it. I mean, it's common sense, but they're aware of it. I don't know. I hope it just stops.
Yeah.
But
Or are they just going to start saying like more allegedlys and more like, well, based on this source who claims that,
Yeah, so someone asked, I posted on our forums if anyone had questions to ask you today. And somebody said, when all the news networks were saying in the beginning, like right after 10/7, they said Israel bombs hospital in Gaza. You remember that?
I do, yeah.
And it turns out it wasn't them. It was like the PIJ or whatever.
Mhm.
The Hamas competitor did it. And the terrorists are the actual ones that did it to their
misfired
own people.
rocket. Yeah.
Misfired rocket. And all the headlines said, Israel bombs hospital in Gaza. And then, like, in small things in the article, maybe it said, source Gaza Health Ministry.
According to.
So, first of all, is it defamation to run a headline like that? Or as long as they say source anonymous, source this person, if
A source tells
CNN would
us.
have put in the article, source this activist that reached out to them in the first place, right? Is that total cover from defamation?
No, it's not. You can't just attribute it to its source and then, be okay with it. It'll help, obviously, but the courts are still going to look at the whole context of the communication.
So could there be a case made for international news like that of the state of Israel of the BBC?
I mean, they're going to claim fog of war. They're going to claim that they didn't have clear evidence. I mean, if they didn't have clear evidence, they shouldn't have
But
reported
up to
it.
what point?
Right.
Up to what point?
Right.
Is there a case? I want to hear from you. Is there a case, in your opinion, where there could be, these fake news headlines every single day, right? Elon Musk doing a sig hail at the inauguration. They're just so clearly out of context, but everyone runs with it. The good people on both sides story that's been so well explained.
Right.
But you have leaders of the free world still running that narrative.
It's clearly been refuted.
When it's been the most fake news, it's clearly intentional defamation, in my opinion, to be able to say things like that. Is there a legal remedy one day, or because it's such big news and such a commonly done thing, it's never going to change, and the court isn't a remedy?
So, every case has to be looked at in its own facts. So it's tough to make generalized statements. But for example, if you take the example about Israel and the Gaza Health Ministry source of Israel bombing a hospital, defamation law in the United States is very protective of speech in general, even this case against CNN. That's why it's such an accomplishment to have gotten punitive damages. It's so difficult to prove.
Right.
But it becomes even more difficult to get any kind of liability at all when the subject of the story is a public person or a matter of public interest. Then the standards get ratcheted up way higher. And so one of the legal maneuvers CNN tried doing was they tried claiming that Zach was a public person.
Based on
the fact that he made some posts on LinkedIn about,
everybody's public then.
So that's what we argued. Exactly what we argued. And the court agreed with us and said no. And so because of that, there was this two-step inquiry, which was CNN negligent? And that was yes, they committed defamation per se. Yes, they committed defamation by implication. And then you got down to show malice, show that they knew it was untrue or had substantial doubts as to its actual falsity, and then published anyways and published with the primary intent to harm. And that malice standard would get incorporated into the first question on a matter of public person like Israel. So you'd have to show that not only did they make the mistake, they knew it was probably not true, and they went ahead and published it anyways. It's very difficult to get that kind of evidence without getting into discovery, and you probably wouldn't get that far in these cases. Also, Israel, I'd have to look at whether a sovereign can sue. Probably, but there's a lot of issues that start jumping out when you try to think through that. So
there's a higher bar for that.
It's a higher bar. I think practically you're not going to see lawsuits from those press stories. Whether it's possible in some technical way, it probably is possible somehow, but it's real tough.
You do see Trump going after more news organizations and having that settlement now with ABC and still going after more.
That's right.
So
that's true.
And he's public.
He's very public.
I guess they're just figuring, let's just settle and not drag this out, which I guess is my first question is, why did CNN not settle this case? They're down 0-2 count coming into this. You've really got them where you want them. Why did they not settle before?
I don't know. You'd have to ask. Well, I will tell you this.
Did they make any offer?
So there was a public mediation.
Okay.
So the court ordered the parties to mediate. That mediation failed.
Okay.
So I shouldn't say I don't know. CNN did try to settle. I think Zach was unwilling to settle. And I've been quoted publicly, going back a year or two ago already, saying he would not settle.
Okay.
Like he wanted.
Everybody's going to settle for the right price. I mean, there has to be a price.
I don't know about that.
Really?
Zach, well, because think about it. Zach was able to
his
clear
honor,
his name.
but the fact that if it is a big, I guess people don't know the size of the settlement. So if there was, obviously, if people knew there was a big settlement, they clearly know CNN is saying, we messed up here.
We're very happy with the settlement.
Okay.
Can't disclose the number, but we're very happy with it.
Was that CNN strategy the whole time to wait and see if they would get called out for punitive damages and then go in and settle that day?
Dangerous strategy. It's a very dangerous strategy, and it's left. I mean, in my opinion, it's left a scar on their reputation. I mean, we now have a jury. First of all, it aired all their dirty laundry, right? Which was all of these messages saw the light of day that may not have ever seen if they were able to settle. I want to asterisk that because I really don't think Zach would have settled until he got his verdict.
So even if you got the settlement that you wound up getting, he wouldn't have taken that number beforehand?
Oh, yeah. He was not settling this case till verdict.
Okay.
I think it was unique in that there were two verdicts that were necessary. So first was, did they commit defamation and how much money do they have to pay? And are they on the hook for punitive damages?
Right.
And the jury said, yes, they did defamation. They should pay $5 million. And yes, we need to punish them.
Which was lower than you wanted.
It was lower than we wanted. But, you got to think about the demographics of where you are. And that area of Florida is just not as affluent as Miami or Broward. So it was not unexpected that they would come in lower.
Okay.
But they answered the next question, which was the most important question, in the affirmative, right? Saying, yes, CNN needs to be punished.
Right. Which is uncapped in Florida, correct?
It is capped.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yes, except in Florida, it becomes uncapped if you did it with the intent to harm the other person.
Okay.
And since in order to get punitive damages on step one, we needed to prove that they primary intent to harm, the jury finding itself removed the cap from phase two.
Okay.
And that was something you argued to the judge.
Yes.
That convinced him. That was a really cool argument.
Yeah. But I think it's right.
It's a very Gemara Cup argument. It was because you already have the
That's right.
Yeah.
It was already established that they did it with malice. So if they did it with malice, and malice requires a primary intent to harm, then the jury's already found that they had a primary intent to harm, which should remove the cap.
Yeah.
Not need
another.
Yeah.
So Zach really wanted two things. He wanted CNN to be proven that they acted with malice against him, and he wanted obviously a settlement, but he didn't want to settle without that. Even if CNN admitted that beforehand, that wouldn't have been enough for him.
I think he wanted vindication.
Right.
And I think he wanted to stand up to, Zach's a really unique person. He's got a really unique background.
Sure.
And I think he did not like the record as it stood. And CNN had already apologized, but that wasn't enough. And he wanted to prove himself right. And I think he also was doing something for societal good. I really think that was part of it for him. He's always been a patriot. I was talking about this before. And one of the things that really fired him up was, one of these women activists called him a mercenary, and he got really upset about it. He's like, I'm not a mercenary. I do get paid for the work I do, but I only do work in the interest of the United States. And so that sort of thing really fired him up. And I think he felt this was almost like his duty to go the distance.
So nothing CNN could have said would have changed his mind. Okay,
no.
interesting.
I mean, you'd have to ask Zach.
Sure.
But my impression is no, he was going to verdict.
Okay.
And then because he got the verdict that said, yeah, they lied about you, they owe you money, and they did it on purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to hurt you, and they knew it wasn't true. At that point, I think he felt he made his point, and he could bow out gracefully and take a settlement from CNN.
Okay. I mean, if the jury decides they want to award, I think you had asked for 30 days of revenue. Was that something that CNN would have appealed, do you think?
100%.
They would have appealed.
Yeah, 100%.
So it would have gone on for another
years.
Who knows how long.
Yeah, years.
Okay.
And then who knows who knows what the appellate courts would do. I think we'd win, but you never know. And so, yeah.
So you take the haircut and you settle, and he was happy with that.
You say it was a haircut. I didn't say there was a haircut.
Okay, fair enough.
I didn't say there wasn't a haircut either, to be clear. I can neither confirm nor deny your comments.
Fair enough. And I saw the jury asking, like, oh, so how much was it? Like, they wanted to know.
They want to know, too. Yeah, absolutely.
That's so funny. I bet you want to know what the jury was thinking.
Oh, my God. Desperate to know.
Have any reporters reached out to the jury pool that you know of?
Not that I'm aware of. Whereas the lawyers are not permitted to do that, but the public is. So, and the jury is allowed to contact us. So
but does the public know who was on the jury?
That's a great
how
question.
How would that connection be made even?
So there's voir dire, which is the selection of the jury, and that's done in open court. It wasn't broadcast live, but it's done in open court. So if anyone was in court, they could have heard the names of the jurors.
Is that something that could come out freedom of information? Who went to the jury selection, or?
You mean like a FOIA request?
Right.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. But it's certainly like it was find outable, and there was a lot of press there that weren't broadcasting live, but they were there. So they know, I think, the names of the jurors.
But I mean, even if there was one juror who's going to speak and could do a podcast like this, I mean, he can't prove, what the whole jury would have ruled for punitive damages. You would never know what they would have decided collectively.
Sure.
That's true.
And they didn't even finish sharing the evidence. You guys settled before all the experts even got
They never even got together to discuss the punitive damage.
No.
Right?
No.
That was
correct. Well, they decided that we were entitled to it.
Right. But they didn't talk about a number.
On a number, right. Well, I mean, who knows? But right. They shouldn't have.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
So you mentioned that this was in this county in was it Florida Panhandle?
It was in the Florida, Bay County.
So how did it wind up there?
We filed up there.
Okay. I want to hear more about that strategy.
Yeah. You are allowed as a plaintiff to choose your venue, and you can choose it for any reason you want. And as long as venue is proper. And venue was proper in Bay County, both because the defamatory content was broadcast there and CNN had affiliates there. And so under Florida law, we were able to go there.
But you could have picked any county in the country, theoretically.
If it had aired there and if there were potentially affiliates there, yes, we could have chosen any in the country. I'm a Florida lawyer, also New York a lawyer and DC lawyer, but it's easier to be home.
Sure.
So that was helpful. I'd rather be in Florida. And then a lot of our preliminary research showed us that Republicans were much more ready to hold CNN, not just CNN, but media to account than Democrats. It's not, a lot of people are like, oh, you love the Republicans. It wasn't that we wanted Republicans that hated CNN. It was just that our research showed us that Republicans were more willing to hold the media to account. And it kind of broke down Republican, Democrat that way. Independents kind of broke with us too. So we went and found a county that was both favorable from a court perspective. The trial courts in Bay County have a great reputation. The First District Court of Appeal, which is the appellate court over there, has a great reputation. So we like the court systems there.
When you say reputation, what does that mean?
Like, they get things right. They're quick. They issue opinions that we like and things like that. There are minor differences in Florida as you go. So Florida's the big state, and there are different district courts of appeal that sit over different areas of Florida. So, for example, Miami and Key West is what we call the 3rd District Court of Appeal. Broward is the 4th District Court of Appeal with, Palm Beach County, and so on. So the appellate court that sits over that geographic area sets the law for that area. Mm-hmm. And it is uniform throughout Florida unless there's a disagreement between two of them. So you can have minor differences in law in Florida depending on which district court's jurisdiction you're in until the Florida Supreme Court will resolve it, and then it becomes uniform. So the law in the first DCA we thought was good for us. The courts in the first DCA we thought were good courts, smart courts, fast courts. And so we liked it from that perspective.
And it voted like 80% Trump, right?
It's like 73, 72.8, I think, percent Trump voters, or not Trump voters, but Republican voters. Okay. So we had everything we wanted: good law, good courts, and a veneer, we call it, like a jury pool of people that we thought were ready to hold the media to account.
What's interesting is just over the past year, I've seen numbers about, people that still respect the media or believe the media is truthful. And even among Democrats, it's really fallen off a cliff over the past year or something like that. And this case also, I think, was eye-opening for both Republicans and Democrats as far as honesty from the media.
Our jury was 3-3, 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats.
So you're able to ask them when their selection, how they're registered, or how do you know that?
No, well, you can look them up.
Okay.
So we know their names, and then you can look them up. So
you just did it instantly when you're selecting the jury?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We had jury consultants with us to help us pick the jury and help figure that out. It actually came out during trial. Zach testified to the fact that we had a jury consultant. We were just like, oh my goodness. He's got to tell the truth, so we can't object.
How did that question come up? CNN asked that?
I think CNN asked who was in the room with you when you were preparing with your lawyers, and Zach answered truthfully. Right. I mean, Zach was super honest, right? And there was this portion of the trial where CNN played some shenanigans and got a document we had never seen and sprung it on us. Right. And the judge wouldn't let us talk to Zach. And so we were internally talking what's going on? And everybody was just 3 years, Zach has never lied to us, ever lied to us. We just have to have some confidence in our client. And it turned out that was rewarded because it was true. He had not lied to us again, and CNN ended up getting lambasted for it. So
what was the breakdown of the jury?
It was 3-3, I think. It was 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. So the county did not come into play really with that 73%.
Yeah, it really didn't.
So it's a 6-person
6 juries, yeah. Well, we selected 8 because you have 2 alternates. Mm-hmm. At jury number 2, after the first week, jury number 2 called in sick. She came off the panel. That brought in alternate juror number 7, became part of the panel. And then there was another alternate, which was juror number 8, and she was dismissed at the end of the case because she wasn't needed.
So the breakdown of the 8 was 4 and 4 then, or what was the?
The breakdown of the 8 was, I don't remember. There were some.
Okay.
Was there? It might have been independent. I don't remember. But we had 3 Democrats.
But interesting, you got 3 Democrats.
Yeah.
I mean, why?
So what happens is we had 40 something people in the room, and I get to ask questions. CNN gets to ask questions. This wasn't aired, and
You don't got to ask about their politics, right? Can
you don't really get to ask about their politics. We didn't ask about their politics. I'd have to think about whether that'd be permissible or not.
Okay.
There might be cases where it'd be permissible, but in this one, we didn't really care that much about it.
Right. I mean, you did do it there because it's a Republican county now.
was
I mean, that's part of the strategy.
Yeah, that's true. But like when it came to picking actual jurors, there were
Yeah.
things we cared much more about
so
than just their
That wasn't a
affiliation.
disappointment for you that it was 3 and 3?
I mean, I would have loved to have 6 jurors that
Sure.
absolutely hated CNN, but that wouldn't have been a fair trial, right?
Sure.
And so part of me was
But representative
relieved.
of the area might have been, 5 and 1 or 4 and 2.
Yeah, the statistics broke down to be like basically 4-2 was the
Right.
statistically likely scenario. It wasn't disappointing to us. I think when we saw the final breakdown of the jury panel, we were like, okay, so CNN's going to get a fair trial, and that actually, in some ways, that kind of was meaningful to us because we didn't want people to be like, oh, they only won because of this. Like,
Right.
and so we thought we had a winning case. And had I known what I know now, like before we filed, we might have filed somewhere else.
Okay.
We didn't know what the evidence was going to show when we filed the case. And so obviously as lawyers, it's our job to do as best of a job as we can for our client. And that includes filing where it's beneficial for him to file.
In retrospect, would you have done it in Miami-Dade?
Possibly, yeah. Because I think we would have gotten a higher first number from the
It
jury.
was before discovery.
That's right. We didn't know.
Oh, you didn't know how damning the
That's
evidence
right,
was
correct.
at that time.
Exactly.
Oh, interesting. What's the
That
order
is
when you find
interesting.
things out?
You file right away.
Okay.
And then once you have a court case, you can start getting documents from the
So
other
you really
side.
knew you didn't have any smoking guns at that point. You didn't know that you
Nothing.
would win these summary judgments.
Right.
Okay, so that changes everything as far as strategy goes.
That's true. That's true. Now I will say we got very lucky with Judge Henry because I've been practicing for a long time now, and he is one of the smartest judges I've ever practiced in front of.
So you might have gotten someone unfavorable here.
I mean, who knows?
Miami-Dade.
Yeah, who knows who we could have gotten? I mean, we have great judges here too, but we also have not so great judges. And you know what? Bay County might be similar, but there's less of them,
Okay.
so it's easier to kind of look at who you might get.
Right.
He was phenomenal. I don't always agree with his decisions. I think he got some things wrong. Obviously, when I lose, I don't think I should have lost. But overall, I thought he did a really good job of kind of calling balls and strikes and following the law. So
you think based on just the average income in Miami-Dade versus Bay County, was it twice as much, something like that? Probably.
I don't know the exact numbers, but yeah,
the damages would have been.
yeah, they would have
probably
been more. I think they would have been more ready to give a higher amount.
Okay.
And I think this jury. I mean, I'm guessing, but I think this jury thinks they gave Zach the world with the $5
Yes.
million. But
I agree. I think
But it was a lot less than his potential, what he could have made.
I think for emotional damage for a regular person, say they got $1 million, that's like retirement money.
right.
For like that's like you're set for life. You got $1 million, you know?
True.
And to someone making $25,000-$30,000 a year, that's a crazy amount of money to give. And I do think that it does show what a great case you argued, that they did that.
So does the fact that
Absolutely.
they settled the case, in between phase 1 and phase 2, does that render moot the ruling of phase 1, or how does what
No, I mean the case is dismissed.
Right.
So, but it doesn't get rid of the jury finding. A jury found after a full trial that they defamed him. They did it purposely and maliciously to hurt him, and
Right.
that they should be punished as a result of that. In determining what the actual punishment should be, we never got that far. So, it does kind of meaning. We can't take our $5 million jury verdict and go bring it to CNN and collect on their assets for it because the settlement replaced that verdict.
right?
But the finding is still there. It's still a fact. It happened, and nothing.
So he
gets rid
got
of
what
that.
he wanted, which is clearing his name. Basically.
Cleared his name, and he again. You remember the money is made in these cases on the punitive damages. So they settled that portion of it, and we can't talk about it.
Sure.
But Zach is very happy.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel like both sides were arguing very much about the punitive as the crux of the issues in their closings, especially.
Right.
I feel like you did it about patriotic duty and everything like
Yeah.
that, and the actual numbers that should be awarded. it was more left to the expert, right? I feel
Yes.
like you didn't really focus on that because you knew, and they knew as well, that it's the punitive that
That's
really
right.
matters here.
That's right. That's what we were really going for. That's where the meat of the, that's where the meat is, so to
Yeah.
speak. So yeah, 100%.
We're watching on the DansDeals forums, watching the case live. At least the settlement part of it, everyone's watching what's gonna happen in phase 1, phase 2. I think the judge asked you at one point if you want 1,000, if you want a fine for something that
Yes.
came up, and one of the guys is really hoping you're gonna say, "Well, now I can afford it."
No, I would not.
Not
I
a good
think his
strategy.
reaction might have been, well, how about we triple it or have we quadruple it? Or like, yeah.
But what happened then? What was that about?
So I think that happens a lot with judges. When one side is really acting out and not acting nicely, they will, in an effort to appear kind of bipartisan or fair, they'll kind of like throw flack both ways. And so I think CNN's counsel did a lot of things that really irked the judge, and I kind of got caught in some of the crossfire. And what ended up happening was, so we were in phase 2, and we were going to put on evidence of their finances. And they had a financial expert they wanted to put on the stand. And we had certain deposition testimony from their CFO we wanted to play. And we had filed a motion that morning at like 5:30 in the morning to exclude their expert witness, saying it didn't meet the standards necessary to be an expert. We had sent to the other side, these are the portions of your CFO depo we want to play. And so CNN got up and said, they waited too long to do this. This is like happening right now. We're unfairly prejudiced. They could have done it earlier. And so then Judge Henry looked at me and he's like, why did you wait today to file it? And so I started going down this pathway of explaining to him, well, what happened was we got permission to add punitive damages. And when that happens, you get the right to seek financial discovery, which is super intrusive. What's their net worth? What are their revenues? Everything like that. So they immediately appealed that decision, because it's appealable right away, to the first DCA. And so instead of us sending financial discovery and then them filing a motion to stay the financial discovery pending resolution of the appeal we just agreed that we would hold off on financial discovery until the first DCA issued its decision. Then what happened is the first DCA...
This was like 2 months before trial?
No, this was a long time ago.
Wait, oh, wow.
Yeah,
okay.
like years ago.
Okay.
And then what happened was the first DCA issued its decision affirming the trial court's adding punitive damages to the case. So as soon as that came down, we went back to CNN and said, okay, now we're doing financial discovery. They filed what they called a motion for rehearing en banc, asking not just the 3-judge panel of the first DCA to decide it, but to have the entire first DCA rehear the case. And we went to Judge Henry and we said, they're going to lose this and it's wrong. And we never agreed to keep it stayed until it's resolved, right, basically. And so he kept us stayed until the first DCA denied the motion for rehearing en banc. Then CNN was like, oh, we might petition to the Supreme Court, the Florida Supreme Court, for review. And we were like, Judge. And at that point, CNN never did it and it never became an issue, and we moved forward. And so what I was trying to set up was to explain to him, I was like, hey, and when that happened, I told you that you're going to jam us up on financial discovery and like everything's going to get late. And at one point, you yourself even said, I don't know when we're going to do these Daubert motions, which is the motion to challenge the finances. But as soon as I started going down the road of, hey, there was this agreement, and he immediately assumed I was like slighting CNN's counsel, which I wasn't doing, actually. Right. That's when he's like, hey, you want $1,000 fine? And so that's why I said no. But
there's background here.
I was like,
were you scared to push back? In that moment?
No. I mean, like, you got to stand up for yourself, right? Yeah. And I'm like, no, like, I obviously don't want to fine, but also, like, I'm doing nothing wrong here.
And he seemed pretty happy with your explanation.
He backed off once he got it. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, you stood up for yourself. You said, I take it very seriously what I say in court.
Yeah. I think judges respect. I mean, you got to be respectful.
Yeah.
But you got to also be able to stand up for yourself. If you're too scared to stand up for yourself or your client, you're not going to be doing a good job. So, I mean, not all judges will, and some would be like, okay, $1,000 fine, but it is what it is. You got to make your record. So,
see, you were Yarmulke during the whole trial.
Of course.
What did anybody comment on that? Do you think that affected anybody's opinions or what they said?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know, but I don't think so. I mean, like I always do. I never have not done it.
Yeah. And I think we're seeing more and more lawyers that are doing that professionally, wearing a yarmulke to court.
Yeah.
That's just my personal, just what I see out there. But
I think especially lawyers, people just expect lawyers to be Jewish anyways. Just kind of fall into that stereotype.
Lawyers and accountants.
Yeah, it's like that's like, oh, he's Jewish, of course he's a lawyer. It's like I feel like it's a badge of honor. It's like, oh, he's not just a lawyer, he's a good lawyer.
Yeah.
He's a Jewish lawyer. I want that Jew lawyer. Like so.
So no comment though from any.
No comment from anyone.
Okay.
Nothing.
And
no.
what about Shabbos?
Shabbos was interesting. I was there for 3 Shabbases because we got there early, but there were 2 Shabbases that were occurring during the trial. And before trial started, I flagged for Judge Henry that, Shabbos starts really early and we'd really have to finish trial
Like
at
5
4:15.
o'clock, something like that.
It's like 4:45 or something
Okay.
like that. Yeah.
Because it's a different time zone.
Different time
So
zone.
it's-
Right. Yeah. I don't think I even realized that Florida had a central time zone. I was looking like, oh yeah.
Neither did
Nobody
I.
knows.
Neither did I and then like sometimes I had to fly out of Tallahassee. So it's like a 2-hour drive, but then you flip time zones.
Right.
And so I'd arrive at the airport an hour after the flight was supposed to leave. And I was like, oh,
It's
God.
pretty wild that it doesn't just like, the time zone does curve between some states, but Florida just has
The
a cut.
panhandle's
Yeah.
so far though.
Right.
It just
does
goes
go-
way
It'll
west.
really
Yeah.
screw things
Right.
up.
I think I first realized that only when you had asked me. I know that your family had tried
Yeah.
flying to you for Shabbos, and they
Oh my
were
God, you guys were clutch on that.
so they're going through Atlanta, and Jenny's like, "We need a flight from Atlanta to what was the airport?
Panama City Beach.
Panama City Beach."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Wow, that's this. They're the same time it departs. It's in a different time zone." I'm like, okay, I don't think I even realized that was a thing.
What folks don't know is at trial, my wife was like you just said, she was supposed to. I was away from the house for 3 weeks, a long time. So we had planned for the second Shabbos, she'd bring all the kids, we'd hang out over Shabbos, and then she'd go back Sunday, and that way at least I'd see the kids. So she did that, and you can't fly from Miami to Panama City. There's
Which
no
is my
direct flight.
first surprise. I'm like, America doesn't have a nonstop to Florida flight,
Right?
Like, that was
Yeah.
surprising to me.
I know. It was crazy. So you have to go through another airport, and the easiest way to do it is go Delta through Atlanta.
Yeah.
And it's like a 45-minute layover. And so they did that. Of course, they land in Atlanta on the Friday morning of this crazy once in a blue moon.
And this wasn't for
snowstorm.
reconnaissance at CNN headquarters.
No.
Doesn't connect you.
No. And it's my wife with 4 kids. And she gets on this plane, and it's snowing and there's backup, and the pilot is telling her, "You're gonna take off. This flight is taking off." And
And
so
I'm
she's
looking at the background of this. Jada's having me, is this flight gonna take off? And I'm looking at it. I'm like, nope.
so
I'm looking at, there were 0 Delta depart. There's nothing going out. And I think this is at noon already on Friday. And she was supposed to leave, I think, 8:30. And like 0 Delta flights have left in the past 3.5 hours. There's no way this little regional jet is going to take off on this little flight. They've got so many planes. I'm looking at the flight radar.
You're literally looking at the actual planes on the runway lined up.
There's
You counted
100
the
planes I'm counting lined up. I'm like, there is no way. And then finally at noon, they lifted the departure stop. And there's still a ground stop at the time for flights going into Atlanta, but there's like 5 flights tricking out in an hour, and there's 5. I'm like, I'm doing the math here. There's no way this flight. So I told JJ, tell Hannah to ask the pilot, like, there's only 5 flights going out per hour. Do you really think we're getting out? And the pilot, the pilot was surprised. They're like, where did you get that data
Yeah,
from?
he
I'm like,
didn't-
I don't have that data. But I'm sitting home on my computer. I'm seeing the data, but the pilot doesn't have that information of the rate of departures per hour and how many flights are lined up.
So my wife's going nuts with 4 kids in the plane and texting with JJ, who's texting with you. So then she's texting me, and I'm trying to do trial. So, but it's just my wife and my kids. So she's like, "What do you do? What do I do?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I don't know." So then I reach out to JJ, and I'm like,
Now, can you be on your phone in the court, or was there a recess?
You can be on your phone in the court. It can't ring.
Okay.
But it's like we thought the jury might look at it like disrespectful.
Sure.
So I was on my computer, which was
Okay.
open in front of me. And I was taking notes, and I was using WhatsApp and
Okay.
iMessage on my
WhatsApp
computer.
web or yeah.
So I reach out to JJ, and I'm like, "What's going on with this flight? What's gonna happen?" And he's like, "I've looked at it. Dan's looked at it. This flight's not taking off." And I'm like, "The pilot's telling her it's gonna take off." JJ's like, "We see more than the pilot." And I'm like, "How sure are you this flight's not taking off?" And he's like, 100% sure this flight is definitely not taking off before Shabbos, and almost certainly not taking off at all. So I text Hannah. I'm like, "You should get off the plane." She's devastated. Like, she wanted to see me and the kids and everything like that. And she's
course.
like, "I want to see you. The pilot's saying it's going to take off." I was like, Dan and JJ are saying it's not taking off. I don't care what the pilot's saying. That flight's not taking off. You might as well get somewhere nice in Atlanta so you're not like
And
Mike.
it's kind of like if you watch like Apollo 13 and you're like, they have only so much information on the aircraft, on the
Right.
spacecraft.
Right.
Houston has the information from them. They're the ones that have the computers. They know a lot more. They're like, well, do we need to tell them that? Is this information they need up there on Apollo 13? Like, no, they don't need this information. It's kind of like, I've got all the information in front of me. The pilot doesn't have that level of information. So he's telling them, yeah, we're going to take off. We're absolutely going to take off. He's telling his passengers, it's gonna happen. I'm like, it's not
And that's what he was
happen.
saying. And so Hannah was like, well, why am I getting off? The pilot's saying it happened. I was like, it's not going to happen. And so she eventually says to me, the kids, like, I told them we should get off. They're like devastated. I'm going to give it one more hour. And I'm like looking at the clock. I'm like, okay, it's still more than enough time to get to Atlanta. I was like, so I literally wrote her. I was like, that's fine, but you realize you're going to have to get off this flight. Like, this is horrible. But she's like, I know, but let's just see. Sure enough, an hour goes by and no progress. So she gets off the flight. And
they're still at the gate, right?
They're still at the gate, didn't take off. She eventually was supposed to take a taxi, but the folks she was staying at said, like, don't get in a car. Atlanta's not ready for snow, like, take a train. And on the way from, maybe 45 minutes or so after she had left the plane, sure enough, the cancellation came through. Yeah. JJ's like, told you. I was like, I didn't doubt you. But yeah.
And then she told me that, David and Tova Isaacs were super nice, took them in, hosted them for Shabbos.
Unbelievable.
Absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And then they said that you can't drive in Atlanta in the snow. And there were dozens of crashes in Atlanta that day. It was crazy. Yeah. They said you have to take the public transport. There's like some sort of tram system. And she said that all the homeless also decided to go on the tram that day. Yeah. And she's with 4 kids.
But she didn't have any suitcases, which I was impressed.
Carry-ons.
I was impressed there was no checked luggage. I'm like, is there checked luggage? Like, how do you get that up? Like, that's impressive.
We've learned some stuff from you guys.
And they wanted to drink because there was snow and it was like filled with drunk homeless people.
Yep.
But she eventually made it there and they had someone pick them up in the like 4-wheel drive vehicle.
Yeah.
And then 20 minutes before Shabbos, the power went out.
Yep, it did.
And,
oh my goodness!
And then
it reminded me when I flew through Dallas in a snowstorm to get to Maui, and there was a crazy snowstorm. All the flights gets canceled. My hotel had not just no power, but had no water. They lost water in Dallas.
Oh God!
These southern cities do not handle the snow very well.
No.
Houston today got snow. Like, we do not own a single snowplow. There's nothing we can do. We just have to wait it out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm sure Atlanta is pretty similar there.
Yeah, it was bad. They did make it to me Sunday morning.
Oh, okay, good.
By the time Sunday morning, afternoonish came around, I guess enough snow had melted.
I was telling JJ on Friday, just rebook it as soon as you can, because
and he did.
That's going to get people are going to fill up those flights, right? The Shabbos flights are going to get canceled too, and people are going to fill up the Sunday flights. That's always got to think ahead of those cancellations, because sometimes there's no flights for 3 more days that have space.
Yeah.
So if you're first there, you change that flight before it's canceled. You can get to the availability.
Yeah. And
so they came Sunday. Okay,
so they came Sunday. JJ had booked them Friday before Shabbos started.
There's no court on Sunday, of course.
There's no court on Sunday. I was supposed to be working.
for the case.
But, family's more important. So we spent...
And that's, of course, the point of going for Shabbos, is you can't work.
Right,
then.
exactly. I was like...
Shabbos is when you spend time
I'm sitting there
with the
just
family.
like twiddling my thums, It's like...
So you're 3 Shabbosim in Panama City Beach, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Just by yourself?
Well, the last one, Hannah was with me.
Okay.
So she came in for closing.
Okay. Just her?
It's just her.
Okay.
My parents watched the kids.
Did she fly through Atlanta or Charlotte this time?
She flew through Atlanta.
Okay.
She flew through Atlanta. I thought about having her go to Tallahassee and then driving 2 hours.
Okay.
But she flew through Atlanta, no problems. And she arrived for the closing arguments and then the jury verdict and then the second portion of, phase 2, which decides the amount. And then she was there for the settlement.
Okay.
And then by the time it was settled, there was like an hour and a half till Shabbos started. There was no time to get out. And there were no flights Saturday night and Matzah Shabbos. So we ended up just being stuck together. And the whole team eventually left because none of them were religious or none of them were Jewish.
Yeah.
Some of them were Jewish, but not religious. And so everyone ended up departing, over the course of Shabbos. And eventually it was just her and I.
Does everyone go out for drinks afterwards? Is there any fraternizing between the opposing counsels after a case?
It depends on the case.
Okay.
This case was very antagonistic at parts.
Sure.
I will say that when it was over, we all shook hands and we were all joking around with each other. So I don't know that there was no opportunity to do that, but it does happen. It does happen. And actually, some of CNN's own witnesses, like their corporate rep, Adam Levine, I have a lot of respect for that guy. He's really smart. He was asked to defend like an impossible position, and we talked a little bit after the case resolved.
Did he have a concert afterwards, or
no, that was Alex Marker. Levine's documents were super clean.
Adam Levine, Maroon 5.
Oh. Well, Marker went to a concert after.
Okay.
And if you caught that, we used that. So
after the actual story aired.
Aired, and he was like expressing frustration that Digital didn't want to publish a story because Digital was like, this is a flawed story, it's Swiss cheese, that sort of thing. So he got frustrated and he wrote to another colleague of his. He's like something, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, whatever, like the story aired. It's a new day. I went to a concert or something like that. It's like the guy literally like burnt Zach's house down and like
I
went
wonder
out.
if these guys,
celebrated.
does someone like him, does he get blowback, after, CNN has to
don't
pay
know.
out a case like this? We don't know, obviously.
I
But,
have no idea.
I mean, you
I have
hope that
no
they
idea.
change their standards. And
They promoted him.
Yeah.
So it was pretty crazy. They won a motion limine on this. I didn't think they should, but
Are you allowed to talk about it now?
yeah, it's just not allowed to go to the jury.
Okay.
So he was promoted after.
Wow.
So what happened was he was like senior national security correspondent, and then he did the story, and then negotiations hit for his contract renewal, and then shortly after that started, we filed our motion for leave to amend to add punitive damages, where we take all the bad evidence in the case and we put it toward the judge and we say, hey, this is real bad. You should let us seek punitive damages. And the courts act as like a gatekeeper to like not allow garbage cases through. And within a month of that or something, like very, very shortly after we filed that motion, CNN paused his contract negotiations and then did an investigation. And like a month later, resumed them, promoted him to chief national security correspondent and gave him a raise. And so we moved.
Did CNN not think they were going to lose this case? Was there just arrogance here?
My closing had a big theme of arrogance.
Yeah.
I don't know, but they did that. And so we wanted to say, hey, not only did CNN do this, they rewarded the guy that did it, right?
Yeah.
But the judge kept it out.
Okay.
We were allowed to talk about his career trajectory. So there's a portion of the cross where I was like, hey,
Why was that not relevant?
He said there was no evidence that there was any kind of quid pro quo or any kind of like bargain for exchange in relation to it. So therefore it's more prejudicial than probative, meaning it would hurt CNN more in the eyes of the jury than it would help us prove our case.
Okay.
I thought he was wrong because I thought, part of punitive damages analysis, part of the analysis of whether they need to be punished is how do they react to this? And here they reacted by promoting the guy.
Right. Which seems like evidence that, they
I
were
thought
happy
so.
with what happened here, which is
something that shocked me the most. And you told me you just got to, play the cards you're dealt, was your partner at the firm, Kyle Roche. He did a fantastic opening.
Yep.
And he was under the impression he had 40 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
And in reality, he had like an hour and 20 minutes.
An hour
that he could have used. And you didn't play the actual segment because you were trying to condense everything into 40 minutes. And then when CNN got up there and said that they had an hour, before they started, he's like, no, judge, it was 40 minutes. Like, I'm sure about this. And he misunderstood, made a mistake. And CNN added to their opening, you saw what they did. They had 20 minutes left and they didn't even show you the clip. That's how much they don't want you to see it. That's how much they started arguing. And it was like so dirty.
It was
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to bring it up again, how they use that against you. And they're just like, not in my courtroom. And they're like, but
that's pretty.
They started it, right? And you said you just got to deal. It's just so much is determined before a trial starts that I never realized that much is decided behind the jury's back, I guess.
Oh yeah, tons of it. I mean, there was a lot of stuff. There's so many moving parts. It's impossible to have total control over everything. And so another really cool example like that ended up working out for us was we wanted to admit the definitions of black market. And so we were just going to scan the dictionary pages, and the scans weren't coming out great, and it had all kinds of other words. And the judge was like, I don't want all these other words to go in. So he said, you know what, we'll just pull the online versions. So the associates pulled the online version and had that first page of the definition. They sent it to CNN. CNN gets up and objects, like, hey, it's only page 1 of 9. And so I was like, I don't know what the other pages are. They must be like advertisements or something. And so we asked the associates to pull them and review them. We're in court. And sometimes these things happen. It just kind of slipped, and they sent it to CNN. CNN said, oh, we've looked at it. Okay. And the judge admitted it into evidence. And then I looked at it and I saw that it had this portion, the Webster's version had this portion of the web page that said like common usage compiled from around the internet. And then it was like a read more. And if you click read more, it says like Webster's does not endorse these definitions, everything like that. But that wasn't on there. And then there was an example of somebody buying like tickets, like secondhand tickets on the black market. And so we ended up going back to the judge and we're like, hey, we want just the dictionary definition. It's got all kinds of other stuff in it. And he's like, no, it's in. And so we were frustrated with that too, because that, what shouldn't have been in there. And it was kind of like, it wasn't dirty by CNN. It was like one of our associates should have picked it up and they didn't. And so it was what it was. But then as we got into trial, Axelrod put up Adam Levine.
Axelrod, CNN.
Axelrod, CNN's lead lawyer, yeah. And he put up Adam Levine, their corporate rep, and, we ended trial every day at 5. And so he clearly dragged that examination out until 4:59 so that the jury would have to go home listening to the favorable testimony of Adam Levine. Now, nothing wrong with that. Strategy, absolutely. But he made a mistake because he ended at 4:59 and there was still a minute left. So what happened was he ended on this issue with these black market, and he puts up the definition on the screen and he goes, look, you see here buying tickets. And remember, one of the core issues in the case was, does black market mean an illegal market or can it mean something else?
Right.
And so he's like, look here, you see Webster's has this definition of buying tickets on the secondhand market. Secondhand tickets is a black market. If you buy Taylor Swift tickets from StubHub, is that a black market? And Adam Levine's like, no, it's not. And so he sits down to rest and kind of leaving the jury with this idea that black market doesn't only mean illegal market.
Right.
And up until that point, every CNN person on the stand said, we understood it to mean an unregulated market.
Correct.
That was their whole defense.
They had nothing. So now he finally hooked into some legitimate source, semi-legitimate source. And of course, it didn't have the Webster's doesn't endorse this. And he was going to leave him with that overnight to come back the next day. But he messed up because he left a minute. So I didn't ask. I just kind of got up there. I was like, Judge, I have a question I can ask in a minute. And he kind of looked at me. And he was like, he's like, okay. And so I was like, can you put that back up there? And he puts it back up. And, obviously I knew this had come in and I had to have a plan for it.
Right.
So I didn't know that he was going to use it for Levine. I thought he was going to wait for closing, but he pulled it out for Levine. So I get up there and I go, hey, do you see here where it says that the version is compiled from online sources? And he says, yeah. And I go, listen, isn't ticket scalping illegal in some states? He's like, oh, I don't know where the law is now in every state. And I was like, okay, but you can agree with me that there are some places where ticket scalping is illegal, right? Sure. And he goes, yeah. And I go, well, in those places then, if you buy a secondhand ticket, then you are doing something illegal and you are working on the black market, aren't you? And he kind of looks at me and he goes, yeah. And I was like, okay, Judge, we can end for the day.
1 minute, short.
I was like, I got it in a minute. And it just completely ruined
It's a great answer for that.
His plan was to leave him with this idea that black market's not. And now they're going home being like, oh, yeah.
Why did he leave the minute? Did he?
I just don't think
that's
he
like
thought I'd have
that, I mean,
he thought it was done.
This is literally the 98-yard kickoff return. You get to the 1 yard line and then you're celebrating and get tackled. Like, are you serious?
That's literally what happened.
Or they drop it. They drop it to spike it. They spike it at the 1 yard line and it's just a fumble.
That was a huge mistake because now they went home. Not only did they not go home on Levine's testimony, they went home thinking, oh, number one, Axelrod's, CNN is misleading us about what the definition is. And number two, the plaintiff is right? Vel's right about this. Like, oh, it is an illegal market, and that's consistent with what's being said. And then they went home with that and sat with it all night. So it was like, I think he didn't think I'd get up and try to use a minute, right? Like, but I was like, hell no. Hell no. Can't let him go home on that. So
wow.
So mistakes happen, but you got, when they happen, you've just got to be ready.
There were a few highlights of the case in the comments on the live stream. They called it a Perry Mason moment. That was one of them. I loved the theater and acting part.
Oh yeah. That was awesome. That was you. That's why you loved it. Yeah.
Do you want to absolutely.
Yeah. So this is crazy actually, but
this is the closing.
This is not closing. Okay. The cross of Marquardt.
Okay.
So Dan watched your closing, which by the way, if no one has seen the closing yet on this case, go look it up. It was unbelievable closing. I feel like you have to put that on your resume.
And so many people online were watching until then. We're like, we're not sure. We really need to listen to closing. And they heard your closing and like, wow. Like that was just a dagger.
That was one guy in a forum. He said he started listening to the case by CNN's defense. That's when he started.
Right.
And he was thinking, CNN's pretty good. And then he heard the closing. He's like, forget it.
It's over. It's
done.
I'm glad to hear that. That's what you're supposed to do in closing. So it's good to hear I was able to accomplish it.
Absolute dagger.
Yeah, this was a big deal. So one of the main themes of our case, like the biggest theme of our case, was CNN chose theater over truth. And the reason we did that was because we had this video, this behind the scenes footage in Discovery. CNN has to produce everything to us. One of the things we asked for was all raw footage that you took to create the video segment. And they turned that over. And we were watching it. And I don't know if CNN didn't watch it all the way to the end or what during Discovery, but in deposition, we got this. what happens is Marquardt makes a phone call to Zach on his phone, and it shows Zachary Young as a contact. And there was a big issue in trial of whether that call was real or not, because the call history wasn't there, but Marquardt said it was real. So whatever. Putting aside whether it's real or not, after that call ends, the cameraman tells Marquardt
Can Verizon not tell you definitively if that was made or not made?
On signal, I don't know.
Okay.
But also it was too late. Nobody had tracked that down during discovery.
Okay.
And now like the evidence is like game, set, match.
okay.
Like now you can't add stuff anymore.
Got it.
And so we were able to take advantage of this, that, you know, and it was actually something we realized in the days leading up to trial. We're like, hold on a second. Like, we always assumed he made the call. But then when we started looking through the evidence, were you there for that too? I think you were there for that too, yeah?
So, yeah.
JJ was there for that too. He was like helping us kind of just like as be like almost like a jury consultant, like giving us like an outside perspective of how the evidence looked. And he went and he's like, wait a second, like there's no missed call here, there's no outgoing call here. And so we started making it a theme of the trial. We're like, well, that's the evidence shows, and like, you know. But putting aside whether he made that call or not, after he makes that call, which clearly rang, he then picks the phone up again. And the cameraman tells him to like pretend like he's making a phone call, and he sits there for like 30 seconds staring at a phone, pretending to call, like with a concerned face.
Like a
on.
fake ring?
Yeah, no, there's no ring at all.
Ring.
It's just sitting there. And they used it for like what they called B-roll footage or whatever it was they called it. And then that fake call, the undisputably fake call, makes it into the final video segment, like where you see Marquardt staring at a phone call. He's like he has this concerned look, and the voiceover's like, we tried to call Zachary Young, but he didn't pick up. It makes him look real shady. When he's done, and the guy's like, okay, cut, we've got it all. Marquardt puts his phone down, and then he takes a step back, and he raises his hands in the air, and he goes, theater, like with this like English accent.
Yeah.
And it was like, what a startling admission, right? Like, oh my God, you literally are admitting that what you're doing was theater.
Yeah.
And so it was a big theme of our case was theater versus truth, right?
Yeah.
Theater versus truth. So, you know, I cross-examined him on this. And
Are you reporting the news or are you making it up?
Exactly. And their standards say we do not create the news. We
Yeah.
report the news, right? And so we slammed him on that. And so in the cross, I had this great moment where I was like, was theater, right? And he's like, no. And I was like, yeah, you know, you that theater makes it in. He's like, no, it's B-roll footage.
Oh, well. Theater. Yeah.
I was just like, you can't even say it. You can't even admit what you did, right? And it was like this really dramatic moment. Then his lawyers get up, you know, CNN's lawyers get up. And then we played the clip. Yeah.
It was like all building up to like, and then you had him saying theater, you know.
So then what happens is his lawyers put him up, right? And they get to ask questions. And so they go, what is this whole thing about theater? And he says, you know, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I'm a big fan of SNL, and I'm a huge John Lovitz fan. And John Lovitz has this character, was it the Thespian or something? What's it called? Or something like that. I forgot what the name of Master Thespian. And he gets up there and he goes, theater. And he says it in SNL. He's like, I was really just like, there was this whole big production and like, we didn't get the shot. And I tried to like, I don't remember his exact words, but
he said something he always does.
Yeah. Or something.
He was like, he always does this.
Yeah.
It's like a thing.
And it was like this like excuse for why he said theater. And I listened to it and I was like, damn, like, obviously it's still bad that he said theater, but this kind of made it less bad. Right. And I was like, this was a big part of our case.
Yeah.
And I was really frustrated about it. And so I was immediately
it made it almost comical a little
bit. He
bit.
kind of like took some of the like sting out of the admission into being like, okay, he was joking. Maybe he shouldn't have been joking, but like it was a bad joke, not an admission of guilt. And so I was pretty frustrated. So I immediately got on the chat with all the lawyers in the team. And I was like, how do you think that came across? And people are like, you know, and then I got on my family WhatsApp chat too. And I was like, hey, is anybody watching? And JJ was watching, Basha was watching, my sister. And I think my sister goes like, I feel like he accomplished in like making it less bad. Unbeknownst to me, JJ decides to go on a crusade. Okay? The man looks up.
JJ, what's your hourly?
It's seriously, it's unbelievable. He's like, wait a second, hold my beer, right? And
I knew before because I remember talking about this with you before the trial, and I remember because you even talked to him about this during deposition, like you mentioned, and he did not mention this.
Right.
There was no mention of this before. This was clearly, and I could say this as a non-lawyer, not involved in the case, this was clearly made up with the lawyer before trial, coached exactly what to say. And like, oh, that's great. Yeah,
in your opinion.
Use that. In my opinion. This is no reflection of the firm. And I did not employ it. Clearly this was set up. Just watching it, it didn't pass the sniff test. It was so clear to me that this was made up prepared, and they're like, oh, that's great, use that, you know?
And he's really good talker, right? He's got like a silver tongue.
Yeah.
He's just really.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's a reason he has how many 3 Emmys or whatever.
Yeah,
it is?
he's
I mean, he's
accomplished.
great. He's a very talented
Very
reporter, and I think he's still going to be great after this segment. And I think hopefully
reporter or actor.
He elevates, his.
Okay.
So we asked him. The Emmys are not in theater. That's the part of it.
So anyway, so I had some background.
So
Sorry.
so
You
JJ.
asked that in trial?
I did in Depo and at trials. Like the Emmys, they're not in theater, right? No, journalism. It was all a setup. It was like whole theme through the cross because we knew this video was coming.
Right.
So it was a big deal that he had like managed to take some of the sting out of it a little bit. And JJ's like, hold my beer. And he goes on SNL and he looks up every single episode that this master thespian, John Lovitz's character, ever appears in. And then he goes onto YouTube and on 5 times speed watches every single one of them to see if John Lovitz actually does this theater thing with his hands. And I had asked ChatGPT if he does, and GPT said he did.
Well.
And so I was like, damn it. But JJ,
this is why I don't trust ChatGPT. And besides for like the case of the lawyers that like went to trial with ChatGPT evidence and getting in trouble for that, it gives a lot of hallucination.
It does hallucinate.
You need to watch what it says. Okay.
So he watches every single one, and then he finds this like interview of Lovitz where he talks about his words. And basically, the long story short is JJ figures out the line isn't theater, it's acting, not theater. And so he tells me this, and he's like, Vel, it's acting, it's not theater. And I was like, because I have no way to back it up, right? And he's like, I'm telling you. I was like, how sure are you? And he's like, I'm 100% sure.
The words
as sure as that flight's getting canceled.
Yeah. He's like, that flight got canceled, didn't it? Right?
The words I told you, because I said, I'm willing to bet $1 billion.
Yeah.
That's what I told him. I'm like, I'm actually willing to bet $1 billion.
So the first thing I did, I go back to GPT and I'm like, give me the source. And he gave me a video. So then I sent the video to JJ and I'm like, watch this video. And he's like, nope, doesn't say it. And I was like, how sure are you? He's like, I'm willing to bet $1 billion. Like, that's a lot of money. You know?
This is some serious trust, by the way. On the fly, trusting me in court. I felt the love.
Yeah. You're on WhatsApp web communicating.
Yeah, we're on WhatsApp, literally talking about the live stream. So he tells me this, and I was like, okay, I have to go for this, right? And so I get up there, and I'm recrossing him, right? Because we called him in direct, and then they cross, and we redirect, but technically it's a cross-examination. And I get up there, hey, you testified about this thing, about, you said it was theater from John Lovitz. He said, yeah, and I was like, the line is acting, not theater, isn't that right? And I guess I just had so much confidence in JJ. I just said it so like confidently. His veneer just shattered.
He must have been shocked.
It just shattered.
Oh my God.
Like his face.
I hope we could put this on when we.
Yeah, you could find it.
We're gonna put this in the video.
Yeah.
Sir, you mentioned John Lovitz before. Do you recall that?
Yes.
You said his famous line was theater. Do you remember that?
One of them, yeah.
Wasn't it really acting? He used to say acting, not theater, sir.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Then I misremembered it. I thought it was theater.
So your testimony here today, sir, is that you invoked a fictional character of a comedy show played by an actor to explain why you faked a call and killed a man's career and reputation with lies and slander.
No, that's incorrect on multiple counts.
His face dropped.
It just dropped, and he just was like humiliated. What it looked like to me was just like humiliation, shock. Surprise, and he says something like, "Oh, was that the line? I must have gotten confused or something." And
how did their team, when they gave him the strategy, not figure that out?
It's crazy.
Like, is this really what he thought?
It's nuts.
Like,
that's what made me so confident that it didn't pass the smell test, because you could see it in the way he presented it. I could see it.
Yeah.
Knowing the history.
Yeah.
That this was just something they came up with, and
hope you bought it. That's it.
And that was it. I mean, his reaction was so strong to that revelation.
He couldn't believe he challenged it. He couldn't believe it.
He couldn't believe he had nothing to say. That I used it in closing, right? I literally was talking about, I was like, you could see it on his face. Like, he's just shattered. Like when
it's also very rare. I think it's very powerful because it's so rare. It's very he said, she said in the trial. I thought Black Market went this, was this. It was all from a long time ago, But to have something, yes, no, on the stand from a witness that you're questioning how truthful he is, and they're questioning that, and just to have something so black and white.
Yeah.
Was it
right?
huge?
He wasn't right.
Was it clear that he lied or that he was mistaken? Or could you tell?
Either way, it
Right.
doesn't matter.
It didn't matter anymore.
Okay.
It was like it
His
had
credibility was hurt.
credibility was shot. The explanation no longer made sense.
Right.
Like
Yes.
I think the takeaway was that he was not being honest. That's the takeaway I took from it. I think it's the takeaway the jury
So it
took
wound
from
up
it.
hurting him
Crushing
even more.
him. Crushing him.
Wow.
Yeah. Really bad. And that's why JJ was like a star of the trial.
That's
It's like a big moment. Everybody's like, wow. And they look at me and they think it's so cool. But really, it was just JJ. Like, it was.
Did you get a dinner out of this, JJ?
I owe him one. Yeah.
Happy to help. Serve justice. It's
That's awesome.
He was great. He stayed up to like 4 a.m. the night of the closing. He went through the closing. He gave me feedback and some really great stuff. Like one of the things CNN was also arguing was when it said, I'm going to nail the Zachary Young mother effer. And then the guy responds back, I'm going to hold you that one, cowboy. And then a couple lines later, Margaret's like, or maybe not, maybe he just slips away. And CNN was putting a lot of like hanging their hat on that, be like, oh, it wasn't trying to nail him. Like he was like, maybe I'll get him. Maybe I won't get him. Like, we'll see what happens.
Right.
And JJ's like, dude, if somebody slips away, it means they got away despite your best efforts to nail him. It doesn't mean that you let him off.
Right.
I was like, duh. Like, it just sometimes takes that outside perspective.
Yeah.
And, JJ's real smart.
Fresh
and
pair of eyes on it.
And he told it to me. And I was like, oh my God. And like, and I did that in closing. And I was like, it's so true.
Meanwhile, Jade is now applying to Harvard. Did you have to get my 180? My 180.
He's like, I dropped out the first time. I'm like, you guys really shouldn't have let me. I'm just saying.
Dropped out of Penn, but now that Harvard's an option
Yeah,
for
just-
yeshiva guys. All right,
Harvard
so
actually wanted me.
Yeah.
That's another story.
you got into Harvard then, right? What happened?
It was early admission
took
to
early
Penn,
admission to Penn, and then you
and
couldn't take-
everyone withdrew it. But Harvard's like, you really want to withdraw?
Right.
Like, are you sure? Harvard's like, you really want to withdraw? And I'm like, I have to. And they're like, okay, if you insist, And you mean
change
you
the
liked
course
me?
change the course of history. You know what it's meant to be, though. It wasn't
Absolutely.
that advice that you
So happy.
the advice that you got to take early admission from Penn, despite thinking you could get into Harvard, and then eventually dropping out and coming to work for DansDeals.
It's the best thing ever.
Right. But the advice itself, like you could look at it negatively, like, hey, that was pretty bad advice. I could have gotten into Harvard.
Right.
Or you could look at it like, no, this was the way it was meant to be. You weren't meant to go to law school and become a lawyer. You were meant to do the career path you chose.
Yeah.
And it was meant to be. That's the advice you got. And it's advice that was still good advice because it led you down a path that you were meant to go down. But it's cool that you can still live like vicariously as a lawyer by having a brother-in-law that's doing these high-profile cases. That's really cool.
It's
really,
amazing.
it's awesome. I mean, I'm happy for the free help, It's,
It's
pretty awesome.
The first case is on the house, but the next case.
No, always on the house.
One of the guys at DansDeals was like, "Oh, you need a jury consultant." I was
Right.
like, "Yeah, get in line behind JJ because
Exactly.
this guy added real value, like multiple times."
That's awesome. So, all right. So jury comes back. They say that liable for everything, every single count, punitive damages. So what happens? And they go out to lunch, and then walk us through like what's the background? Who goes over to who? What's the inside?
The
baseball?
settlement negotiation.
Of what you're allowed to say, because obviously.
Right.
I mean, there had been some discussions between the parties, but like I said, there wasn't really going anywhere. So after the jury came down with a verdict, that usually can loosen everybody up on their positions. So the conversations restarted. And
As soon as they go out to lunch, like you're talking.
they didn't go to
or-
lunch. They
Oh,
took,
okay.
yeah. So
What
actually,
was it then?
so it's funny. Oh, did they? So we ordered lunch. I remember when they came back, they wrote to the judge that they had reached a verdict.
Okay.
And so the bailiff comes out and, she's like, verdict. So everybody starts coming back in to see, because, they had asked questions and things like that, but this was verdict. And I overheard when she handed the letter to the bailiff, she goes, but we still want lunch. And I had no idea how to interpret that. Like, what does that mean? We're done. There's no phase 2. We're not giving punitive damages, but we're still hungry and we want lunch.
Right.
Or does that mean like we know that like we need to go into a phase 2 now, but before that we want lunch?
Right.
I had
Either
no
way.
idea, and I'm sitting there racking my brains like which one is more likely, which one?
No.
Like no. So they ordered. Then they reached the verdict. Obviously, we were staying for phase 2. They ordered lunch, but then what happened was the judge pushed us right to keep going because he knew we had to end early for Shabbos. So what happened was you asked me about the Shabbos thing. So I had flagged early on, like months before trial, that I would need to end trial at 4:15. The judge granted the request, like, looked to CNN, any objections? They didn't object. She's like, okay, so we'll stop at 4:15 on Fridays.
They had a Jewish lawyer too, but not Orthodox.
Yeah, right. Not Orthodox. Did they have a Jewish lawyer? I don't know if they had a Jewish lawyer.
Okay.
I don't know.
Axelrod's a Jewish name.
Is he? Yeah. I
just
honestly don't know.
assumed, but I guess I don't.
Axelrod's like Schwartz.
Yeah, okay.
I assumed.
So, yeah, it very well might be.
Yeah.
So they didn't object. So we were planning on ending at 4:15. But then what happened was, as trial went on, like, we were falling way behind schedule. And it became obvious that we couldn't just lose 45 minutes, but I couldn't be there for those 45 minutes. So I eventually just told the team, I was like, just keep going. I just have to leave.
This is the first Friday.
This was the first Friday.
Right.
Right.
So I did, I explained what had happened, and I just left. And, trial continued until 5:00. But on this phase 2, what I told Judge Henry was, listen, like, there's going to need to be a closing, and I need to be able to give that closing.
Sure.
So we can't, like, we have to end at 4. I think at that time, like, Shabbos pushed a little later, and we were within a few blocks of the courthouse. So as long as I had like 10 minutes before Shkia hit, like, I could go out and walk home, and, and Hannah was there, so she would have been home and lighting already. So we would have been okay. That was on day 2. So Judge Henry was aware of that. And so he was pushing us to keep going. So we immediately went into opening of phase 2. Then we put on our expert who talked about their revenues and their net worth and everything like that. While that was going on, I was outside negotiating with one of CNN's lawyers.
Okay.
And so the case was proceeding and we were negotiating.
The expert or somebody had mentioned 30 days revenue. How do you determine, like, what's a punishment? Where did that come from?
It's a great question. It's just a strategy. You've got to think through what the jury would buy.
Why not say 6 months? Why not say 2 months? Where does that? It's just out of the blue.
No, we had a lot of discussions about why we chose the numbers we chose and things like that. But you could have chosen any of them.
Right.
We needed to get an answer from the expert that they could afford it.
Right.
So that was one thing that was important. And we also, again, we were cognizant of where we were. And so we didn't want to be asking for $1 billion. The press reported it as $1 billion case.
Right.
We never reported it as $1 billion case.
Right.
But, obviously it had the potential to go very high. And so it was, I think the revenues were like $5 million a day.
Right.
And so, that was what it was, like 150 million or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think we just kind of landed on that number as being like, it was a nice even number of 30
Punishment,
days.
it's not making them go bankrupt.
Right. It won't make them go bankrupt, but it's enough to, there was also a factor of, like, I had this thing I wanted to say in closing, which was, if you want to make a difference, you got to make a dent. And this is a big.
So you had that closing prepared already?
Not written, but like in my head, I had ideas. I've been doing this for 2.5 years, so I have a little note on my phone somewhere with all like the ideas I wanted to weave into the closing. And so, there was something to, like, I want their revenue was like 2 billion or 2.2 billion. And so I wanted like somewhere around 10%. Okay. And I wanted to say something like, if the media companies know that every time they do this, you're going to take 10% out of their bank account, they're going to stop real fast. Yeah. And so we wanted to target that number, around that number. And so that's kind of some of the thought process that went into it, but there's no, like,
so 30 days, 60 days. It's just, you're taking it out of.
You got to pick what you think the jury will buy. And we thought about, what was the time frame between when they started the investigation and when they published. Like,
I guess what goes through my thought is, if you ask for 60 days, maybe they'll come back and give you 30 days. So if you ask for 30 days, maybe they only give you 15 days of revenue. Like, well, is it like negotiating, or are they just going to buy your argument and say, like, you know what, we'll give you?
I think Joe, the lawyer that was crossing your expert on the money matters, I think he did it so well. Yeah. Because he did it very nonchalant. Like, what would a 30-day timeout be? It was very like
it wasn't a direct ask.
It's not even a big punishment. What would a small punishment be? A small punishment would be $150 million.
And he's like, it would mean nothing to him.
I have a feeling
be damaging. It would just be punishing, but it wouldn't be damaging
exactly.
to the core
that was
business.
like the floor. I think that the CNN people saw that.
So would you have asked for 10%? Would you have asked for higher than that then in closing? Or
so we had not yet determined that. I mean, this was happening so fast.
Yeah,
right? Like,
crazy speed at that point.
Insane. And we had talked about whether to ask for numbers in voir dire when we were, when we were interviewing the jury. We talked about whether to ask for them in opening. In closing, you must give numbers. So we gave some numbers at closing. But then when we started off again, the phase 2, it was just being like, it was lightning fast. And so we were out talking amongst ourselves at lunch break for 20 minutes, talking to each other, like, what's the number we should ask? How many days timeout should we ask for? Where do we want to be? And we were purposely going for something that was like high, but that wouldn't limit us to, like, not be able to ask for more.
Right.
Because it's just to think,
Very
like,
well
if
done.
you were asking like 20 million for the original damages and you came back with 5, if you ask for 30 days, maybe they come back and chop that down by 79%.
Yeah, except so there's a lot to think
No?
about there because they have to punish CNN,
Right.
and they understood the idea that
Okay.
like if you give Bill Gates a $10 speeding ticket, it's nothing.
Yeah, that came up with the expert.
And what we don't know is they knew from voir dire that the money from punitive damages all goes to Zach because I tried to get people out and did get somebody knocked out for that. So I went around saying, hey, this is the way the law allows punishment, and you're going to potentially make Zachary Young one of the richest people in the world. Are you okay with that? And I got one guy to say, like, I don't know that I could do that, right?
Okay.
And that knocked him off the veneer.
That's more
for
important
cause.
if they're a Republican or Democrat.
Exactly. There's a lot of things that are more important than that, right? So we got him off. But they knew from beforehand that all this money is going to go to Zach. So what I don't know, because I haven't spoken to the jury, is whether they gave 5 because they knew they were going to wallop CNN on the back end.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I don't
Interesting.
know what they were going to do.
It's also such a different mindset of what someone's lifetime work is worth versus what CNN should be punished
Correct.
with. And the whole argument was that CNN has to be punished. That's what the whole closing, the whole everything was all building up to that punitive. So when punitive got awarded, I feel like it would have been so much more than that. And I think CNN was also defending the punitive mainly because that's what they were trying to fight against. That's why everyone had the same story of no regret, right?
Yeah.
What an interesting decision by CNN. I mean, maybe
I
the
think that
people-
was a mistake.
To apologize
I
and then say no
agree.
regret.
I think if they had apologized,
and meant it sincerely, not everyone take it back.
Yeah.
And like, we didn't agree with that
A few
apology.
people could
lost
say-
liability.
They're like, well, the lawyer said we had to apologize, but we don't actually think editorially it had to be apologized for.
And under the law, you really still kind of do need to award punitive damages in that instance. Like, I mean, the jury has the discretion not to. So, but it would still be called for, but less because you wouldn't necessarily need a deterrent effect. And again, at the end of the day, jurors are humans. So if they saw real regret and real sympathy from CNN,
then
as
maybe you don't need
opposed
to punish them as much monetarily.
or maybe you don't need to punish them at all. They learned their
Exactly.
lesson. We
No.
hit them on the liability, and they, I don't know what happened, but I thought that was a massive mistake.
Interesting.
I think they bet the farm on winning punitive. And I think that's what their strategy was. No regret. We did nothing wrong. There was nothing intentional. And by saying, like, what do we have to be sorry for, was arguing that point, I
Mhm.
think. And that's when I think they saw that punitive was coming. They knew. Just
Of course,
write
they
a
were
check.
screwed either way because they had issued this apology.
Right.
And then it's like, so they had issued this
It's
apology.
like an apology, non-apology. Like some of the legal team wanted us to apologize.
Yeah,
we
and
hoped
that
it
was
would get us out.
Levine.
We hoped it would get us out of the case.
And it was just an impossible position to defend, which is
Right.
why we exploited it. We're
Yeah.
just like, well, are you sorry or not?
No,
You know,
no,
it's just
an
like-
insincere apology. Everyone's gonna hate that. The jury's gonna hate that. Like, what
Yeah.
is that?
I have
And then one of the juror questions was like, does a near and sincere apology
Yeah.
reflect poorly on the organization that
Very
gives
good
it?
jury questions came up.
jury questions were
amazing.
incredible.
Amazing.
Is that, do they always have jury questions after expert testimony?
In Florida, you're required to allow them to ask questions unless both parties agree otherwise.
Okay.
CNN did not want jury questions.
Okay.
After the first round, they didn't,
They didn't want
them.
before either.
Oh,
How
really?
come?
But we wouldn't agree. We wanted.
Why didn't they want jury questions?
I don't know. I don't
Is
know
that a
why.
strategy? Is that
It takes a little longer because the jury
Okay.
gets a chance to ask questions.
Right.
I don't know, but they did not want them, and we.
does the
we
jury
wanted-
know that they didn't want them, or is that
No.
No.
That's,
No, it's kept from the jury.
That's
kept from the jury.
confidential.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
but because you didn't agree to that, they were able to ask questions, and they asked great questions.
They ask great questions.
Yeah.
Great questions. And we use their questions throughout our closings and our themes.
So that
We
changed your
wove
own
them in.
strategy.
Oh, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're seeing how they're reacting in real time to it. So,
Right.
Right.
like, one of the really great questions we wove in was that CNN had taken this approach where it was like guilty until proven innocent. And technically, I mean, they're not a court of law, but like the idea kind of resonated, and it was a jury question, and we
Doesn't
just
sit well
wove
with
it.
Americans.
It doesn't sit well with
No.
Americans, and we just kind of wove it through our themes because it was a jury question, right?
Right.
And another jury asked, like, how much money would you have made if this didn't actually get asked? I think one of the jurors asked, how much would you have made if you were at Five Eyes? So his colleagues went on to create a new company and was doing his sort of thing without him.
Okay.
And so one of the jurors asked, like, how much money would you have made if you were there?
Okay.
And technically, he doesn't have a foundation to answer that question. Like, as a legal evidentiary matter, he doesn't know
Right.
how much he would have made unless he has a basis, and he didn't have a basis. So the judge didn't ask the question, but we knew it got asked.
Okay.
So then in closing, we talked about, can you imagine how much money would have made at Five Eyes? You know, we can do that sort of
Interesting.
thing.
Because some of the things the judge had kept sealed, right? What was something?
One letter the
One
judge
le-
kept
okay.
sealed. Yeah,
What
he
was that
unsealed it
about?
at the end. So
remember
the
what-
jury had asked him, can we answer questions 1 and 2? and then come back tomorrow and
Okay.
answer 3, 4, and
Okay.
5.
Right.
And so he sealed it because obviously if you answer no to questions 1 and 2, which is did they commit defamation per se, did they commit defamation by implication, if you say no and no, the case is over.
Right.
So the idea that they're saying, oh, can we come back and answer 3, 4, 5 means that they're answering yes to at least one of 1 or 2. And so he didn't want anyone to have insight into the
Okay.
deliberations. He sealed the letter.
So that was the right move by the judge.
I think
But
so.
so
He was in a tough spot because
Interesting
like, I
that
don't
you
know.
knew the questions though, even if the judge didn't want them asked, but you could still address them. in
So
closing.
because
Very
what happens
cool.
is they pass the questions up, and
Yeah.
then the judge reads us the questions, and then asks if we have an objection to the questions, or if
Okay.
CNN has an objection to the questions.
Okay, so did
and-
CNN object to that question, or the
I
judge
think
decide?
I don't remember if CNN. There's a transcript, so we can look
Yeah.
it up, but I don't remember if CNN objected to that question or the judge just kept that one out on his own.
Okay,
We wanted it asked, obviously,
Of course.
but,
Right.
you also have to maintain credibility. So when the judge is like, "But what's the foundational issue?" You have to concede. Well, there's a problem here. So.
are jury questions going to generally be beneficial for the plaintiff, or what do you think?
I think it just gives you,
No,
I think it just gives you
an
insight
idea.
into what they're thinking.
I'm just curious why CNN would not want that kind of insight, because they could also use it to their advantage. I
Yeah,
assume.
I don't know why they didn't.
Okay.
I don't know why they didn't, but
but
they didn't
regardless,
want it.
Florida laws even is that typical in other states, or
There are rules about jury questions in other states. I'm blanking on what they are. I think federal court, they can ask questions, but I don't know if they're like Florida state court has it set up that unless both parties agree, the jury gets to ask questions.
okay?
And I've forgotten what the default rule is in federal court. I remember we had a
I've
federal
never
trial
noticed
they
it
asked
before. I mean, I
questions.
thought I watched a lot of trials, but
Yeah.
never noticed those insightful questions coming up. And
Yeah.
being
No,
able
they
to
were
address
really
them.
great questions. The jury actually was super, super following along. They
Yeah.
understood the issues. They asked great questions. It was, and in fact, one of them was real great. She asked a question and the witness kind of didn't answer it, and she wrote another, and she passed it to the judge, and
Wow.
and it was like, answer my question. I was like, damn, like, that woman's a lawyer right there. Yeah,
That's great.
yeah, it was really cool.
That's amazing.
So somebody, you got to play this for you. So when you presented that settlement offer to Zach, right, the final one that you guys took,
Mhm.
kind of imagine, I know you can't talk about what it was and anything, but just before you presented it to him, I kind of imagine you did something like this.
That brings back a lot of memories.
And then you told him, and he was just like, yes.
I wish I had done that.
Right? In retrospect,
Did not occur to me.
next time.
Did not occur to me.
I feel like every judge should institute this, like before they say like the amount.
So CNN's lawyer takes you out of you go out of the court while they're questioning the expert on the finances, and you're negotiating a settlement.
Yeah.
Like, what's the back and forth? They're like, all right, we'll give you X, and is it just a regular negotiation? Or?
Yeah, it was a negotiation. I mean, obviously, it goes beyond just X, Y, X, Y, X, Y, and
Yeah.
there's positions, and well, we want this, and I want this, and confidentiality, and there's
Sure.
things like that, and there were demands made that we said no to. We made demands they said no to. I mean,
Okay.
like it's more than just a
Can you give any
number.
examples, or those are all confidential? What one side would want, or
Or what would considerations be in a theoretical case?
So that's easier. Like sometimes instead of confidentiality, parties might want to have like an agreed statement. Let's say, for example, like what are you going to say if you're asked?
Mhm.
And so sometimes that's something that's up for negotiation, and one side might say, no, we're not agreeing that. We'll keep the number confidential,
Right.
right, but we won't keep anything else confidential. That's something you could see in a
Okay.
case like this. And then, you argue your positions like, oh, well, we're about to ask the jury for this much money, and they're going to, you saw what they did. And, they found you liable for punitives. Like, you really want to risk going to the jury on it,
Mhm.
And then the CNN will say back, well, you asked for more money. You didn't get everything you asked for. Why do you think you're going to get asked for it? So it's like, it's a negotiation back and forth.
And is that just with the lawyers, or is like the CNN?
Right, are they calling like corporate?
are
No,
like,
no, yeah,
do
they
you
gotta get
authorize us to
authority.
write a
Yeah,
check
no, they
for-
have to get authority. So, I talk to the lawyer talks to them, lawyer comes back, talks to me, I talk to Zach, then I come back, talk to the lawyer.
Right, a whole chain.
Yeah.
Do media companies have insurance for this kind of thing? Is there any insurance? that could
defamation
get defamation?
insurance?
Is that a
I
thing?
doubt it.
No. Okay.
Especially when they have $2 billion in assets. You
All right.
know,
All right.
was that now like SEC public record? Like the numbers that you put up in the court that
Mhm.
did make it in.
Mhm.
Is it going to be?
Is that? I mean, that was, I think, shocking.
Recorded?
I think that was shocking to a lot of people that they've been saying CNN's in decline, CNN's in decline, but like they really are in decline apparently over the past 2-3 years.
Yeah.
Is that the first time that information came out to the public?
I think so, yeah, because CNN is a subsidiary of Time Warner, Warner Brothers Discovery, rather, it's called now.
Okay.
And so Warner Brothers Discovery kind of reports all the finances rolled up into one.
Mhm.
And this is a huge issue in the pretrial proceedings.
Yeah,
in
it
court.
got me kind of confused. The CNN Worldwide International versus
Inc.
yeah.
So the
I
defendant
didn't
is
follow
CNN
that.
Inc. The defendant is CNN Inc.
Right.
But what CNN says is
But the revenues were also for Worldwide. Is that what happened there?
so CNN Worldwide isn't a real entity.
Okay.
But it's the way they refer to their business, the CNN business. And it
Okay.
incorporates CNN Inc. and other entities. And so they had to report, they claimed, like CNN Worldwide's revenues and CNN Worldwide stuff because that was the only way they claimed they accounted for it.
Okay.
We were focused on CNN Inc. because it was the defendant.
Right.
And then, there were huge fights between us and CNN in the stages leading up to trial about whether their disclosures were accurate. Like CNN claimed they had no cash flow statements. And we're like, are you out of your mind?
Yeah.
You're a $2 billion entity. Like now it's public, but we couldn't say it at the time. But it's like, you're $2 billion. You get $2 billion of revenue. You telling me you don't account for where that cash goes? Like, do your shareholders know this? Like, but they claim they're like, no, Warner Brothers manages all our cash, and so there was huge fights back and forth, and we ended up going to Delaware to move to compel Warner Brothers to comply with the subpoena, and Warner Brothers was yelling and screaming that we didn't give enough time and this, that, and
Wow.
we said, hey, if they don't have it, swear that they don't have it, and Warner Brothers was like, well, the judge in Florida didn't make them do that, and the judge in Delaware was like, well, I'm making you do that. And he's like, produce it, like reissue the subpoena. You have 20 days to respond, and if you don't have it, like give a sworn declaration. And so we had a lot of litigation and parallel litigation against CNN, against Warner Brothers Discovery and stuff like that.
That's where I was getting confused with the expert because they were asking like there's Worldwide and there's CNN Inc. and there's I don't know what's going on here anymore. Who's suing and
Right.
who has what assets? It got kind of confusing for me. I don't know about for the jury.
I'm sure for the jury too. And then it'd be my job at the end to kind of make
Okay.
it make sense, right?
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
I saw it, and I don't know if you can comment on this or not, but I think David Axelrod said at one point that we don't want the CFO's testimony deposition to be played because it's just going to be so embarrassing for CNN.
Did he say that?
Yeah, you weren't in court.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
It's not legit. I'm sure he didn't win.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, the judge was deciding the whole 20 minutes, and Joe went out to edit it down to
I
a
see.
shorter amount of thing, and they were just saying it's going to be embarrassing. Is that public record, that deposition, or it's because it
I don't
didn't
think
make
the
it in-
entire deposition is public record, but we did play portions of it in phase one. Very few portions.
Right.
But,
So the parts that weren't played,
no.
they're sealed.
Yeah.
They can't get
Designated
out. Okay.
confidential, yeah.
So curious. What's embarrassing? I'm like, it almost sounded to me like they wanted to settle because they didn't want like that embarrassing. I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
I wonder if that
I don't know
came
what he's
into
referring
it.
to.
Yeah.
But
Very
we played,
interesting.
one of the things they were slamming Zach about was like his profit margins were like 65% profit margins. And so we in phase one played the CFO's testimony that they projected profit margins to 42.8%.
Right.
Right.
And it's like, what are you taught? Like you're allowed to go get 42.8% of a multi-billion-dollar entity, but he's not allowed to get 65%. And
Yeah.
so it was, that came out.
Right. Okay. So
you're asking is the amount that they settled for, is that going to be public as far as like SEC filings? Do you have
no,
to
but he's
file?
saying it's all wrapped up into Warner Brothers, so it's going to be.
But if it's something that needs a disclosure, does that need to be disclosed?
You'd have to ask SEC lawyers. I mean,
right.
like it would have to be, my gut instinct is the amount of the money that exchanged hands would have to be so material
Right.
that it would affect not
Warner
CNN's $2 billion business,
Yeah.
but Warner Brothers like 40 something
Right.
billion
And
dollar
obviously
business.
It's nothing. It's not material at all for that.
I mean, I don't want to comment on amounts, but
even if it's hundreds of millions of
Yeah,
dollars,
like,
it's still not gonna.
yeah, if you're worth like 40 something billion, even if you paid,
Yeah.
like
if you
you
paid
said,
$1 billion, it might not be a
Yeah.
material change.
Yeah.
Right.
So that negotiation goes back and forth for a couple hours?
No, I mean it was quick.
Okay.
Because we were moving forward.
Yeah.
Like Judge Henry was like, "Where's Vel?" Because I had to cross their expert.
Right.
So their expert was about to testify, and then I had to cross, and it eventually got to a point where we were real close, but not there yet. And we actually went to the judge, and we asked for a sidebar, and we said, "Listen, we are real close to settling, but we're not done yet. Like, can you just stop this for 15 minutes?" And he agreed.
That was
he's done.
monetary difference or some disclosure
I mean, like
difference or whatever
all,
difference.
just like we were close, but not
Okay.
there yet. And I think both parties knew that we were within striking distance. There was a real
gonna
chance
happen,
this was
yeah.
going to happen. Not that it was guaranteed to happen, but that it was real chance it was going to happen. And
Okay.
so we both went in and we're like, we need some more time. Like you got to stop because like it's too fast, and like we can't get CNN as a corporation. They need multiple levels of approval. Zach had to think about things, make sure he was comfortable with it. So it's just there wasn't enough time. And so he did. He took his foot off
Is
the
it
gas.
is it ultimately up to Zach at that point? Is it completely his call whether to take
Yeah,
or reject
100%.
this? Okay.
Of course,
Yeah.
he's just representing his client.
Of course,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering like how much influence you have versus.
I mean, I give it advice, but
Right.
at the end of the day, it's his.
It's his call.
Zach's a really great guy, and like he did ask me at the end. He's like, "Are you okay if I take this?"
Yeah.
And I thought it was really nice of him to ask, because
Yeah.
like most clients don't ask, and I was like, absolutely, like you
Yeah.
know, first of all, it's your case, and second of all, no complaints here. Like
Yeah.
you know, I was like, you let me go to verdict. I wanted to go to verdict. I
Yeah.
wanted a verdict real bad. Like
Okay.
this had never been done before. Well, I don't know about never, but it hasn't been done in like 50, 60 years.
Right.
Like, and I really wanted the chance to get the verdict. So once he gave me the verdict, you know, I was, as long as there was enough that he was happy and I was happy, I was
Did you
happy.
find a nice bottle of kosher wine for Shabbos to celebrate with afterwards?
You know what? Not only that, we didn't have any wine. We had to make kiddush on bread.
Oh my goodness.
On like stale bread too, because it was like we had ordered food from Pomegranate,
Okay.
and it got stuck in the blizzard.
Oh,
Yeah, so it ended up coming, but like some of it I was a little like afraid to eat.
Yeah.
And but the bread was okay, but
Okay.
you know, we had opened some of it, and it was just like it was a wonderful Shabbos, because it was like there was nothing to do. It was just me and my wife,
and you're in a high.
and we were like super excited about what we had done and
Yeah.
accomplished, and so we got to walk around Panama City, and we took a million walks, and
Did anybody recognize you? Or?
a few people,
Okay.
but not like
Yeah.
everywhere I went, but a
Yeah.
few people. I was in Jerusalem Pizza, which is like the pizza store here, the other day,
Yeah.
just buying pizza, and some guy walked in. He's like, "Oh, you're famous."
That's
I don't know about that, but yeah.
So overall, your strategy was pretty much to not just go after the facts of the case, but also to make this a broader like media story. And it seems like that was successful.
I don't know. I mean, we weren't focused on making the media pick up as much of it.
As far as just holding media accountable as part of the
That
strategy
was
of getting.
oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's
so-
part of the punitive damages, right? And there was like these warring cross closing arguments where I went up there and was like, "This is your opportunity to send a message." Like the media is lining.
And there was a lot of news coverage, like of reporters unhappy with that. I guess they were like,
Yeah.
"Well, you're trying to politicize this, and you're trying to, you know."
Yeah, but we weren't. I mean, there was no partisan basis in the story. It wasn't about Republican or conservative or liberal or Democrats. It
Right.
was just the news has gotten out of hand.
Right. And you called for it it should return to the center.
Yeah,
right?
return to the
More-
center, exactly. And so, you know, and then Axelrod got up, CNN's lawyer got up and said, like, this is not about sending a message, right? And then I got to get back up and rebuttal and be like, it's exactly what this is about, right? That's the purpose of punitive damages, to send a message, to deter, like, send the message.
And it seemed like that really resonated, that strategy.
I think so.
right?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they awarded it, so it worked. So
So I guess maybe last question, but someone had asked if you tried to put tefillin on Jake Tapper.
So I have had success putting on tefillin on a lot of people. You'd be
Really?
surprised, yeah.
Okay.
But Jake Tapper's deposition was done remotely via Zoom.
Okay.
And so I did not have an opportunity to put
So
it on.
Yossi Farrow can still go out there and try to find him.
Absolutely. You know what? I think he'd be open to it. You know, you only saw portions of Jake Tapper's deposition, and Tapper kind of got given a script of what to say. He did say in deposition he was intimately involved in all of his shows, but you know, I'm not sure Tapper actually like meant to hurt this guy.
Right.
I'd put money that he
For how
probably
much actual
didn't.
reporting he does.
Yeah.
He's a pretty face.
I mean,
Is actually
he says
big
he's
news?
not. He says he's,
Okay.
you know, he's.
He says he's not a pretty face. Is that on the record?
He does actual reporting.
I asked him in Depo, like, are you kind of like a movie star?
Right.
And so, like, you just kind of show up and get given your lines and walk out. And he's like, no, I'm
Okay.
involved intimately in all aspects
But
of the
I'm sure
show.
there are cases where he's more involved than others, right?
And
Sometimes
he
he's
didn't
just
do the
gonna be-
reporting. You know, this was a segment that featured on his show.
Right.
And, you know, I think he kind of trusted his team to get that right.
So what did he say about that? Does he actually do reporting on segments that are featured on the show? I mean, obviously not as much as when they feature him.
I'm sure
right?
he reviews it, he editorializes it, and I'm sure he relies on CNN's procedures to,
Sure.
you know, to get it done. And we didn't have any proof that, you know, Tapper was aware it was not true and Tapper did it on purpose. Like, we had nothing like that. But there, you know, there's a lot of that deposition that didn't get aired, and it's confidential. But I will tell you, he spoke passionately about going to Israel after October 7th.
I thought he was great after October 7th. I thought Anderson Cooper and Jake Tapper were actually really positive and really covered it fairly. And
So Yossi Farah might have
Right.
some success.
I'll be excited to
Just
hear
don't
that.
tell him he's caught that I recommended it, because I think
he's gonna
I'm
be
persona non grata, I think, over there right now.
Are you kidding? CNN is hiring you for the next case that they have to defend.
I highly doubt it.
I don't. I don't. All right.
So
On
do you
that
see
note,
it snowballing
what-
from here? Do you see more cases coming to you because of this? Or I mean, you had mentioned that you already had some.
Yeah, we have a lot of inbounds. A lot of them are far out there, or
Sure.
people that are kind of a little on the fringe.
Yeah.
So we're looking through them and kind of trying to pick and choose what it is we want to deal with. And it's also important from our perspective, like the sort of cases we lend our name to. It's important to us. We like to say we take cases we believe in, and so we've turned down some cases based on that, even though we think they might be meritorious. It's like, this is not the case for us.
Yeah.
So, I mean, God willing, Rich Hashem, I hope so. But at the end of the day, one thing I've seen, starting from working for a big law firm and then starting my own law firm and taking these high profile cases is really, at the end of the day, Hashem controls your parnasa. And
Absolutely.
you might think you got the greatest case in the world and it'll turn into nothing, or you might have a nothing case and it turned into something huge. And so I hope so, but at the end of the day, it's all with him.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the
Of
time
course,
today. It was
pleasure. This was
riveting
fun.
and I
Really
love
fun
it.
conversation. Really fun.
Awesome.